Good morning and welcome everybody here today to people having their speakers on. Good morning everybody. Welcome this morning to the Housing and Social Wellbeing Committee. I have apologies for the meeting, please.
Thanks, Convener. We have apologies today from Councillor Forbes with Councillor Duff substituting, Councillor Welch with Councillor Harvey substituting and Councillor James. We've got one member online, Bailey McLaren. Can you confirm you're present, please?
Present, Jess.
Thank you. Thank you. All other members are in the chambers, Convener.
Thank you very much. On the top table here, we have to my left the Vice Convener Sheila McCall. We have Elaine Ritchie, the Strategic Lead of Housing and Communities. I have Serge Marone, the Strategic Lead for Economic Development and Planning, and of course Jessica Gill, the Democratic Officer. Can I remind councillors and officers to join virtually to use the chat box in the room as well to indicate that you wish to speak in the committee. And I will take people in order. I'll take one question at a time and I take note of things, so I go back to your second question when the order is correct, but I give everybody the opportunity to ask their first question first, because that's only fair. Do we have any declarations of interest?
Non-financial interest, possibly with the cultural paper with I'm on the board of trustees of the Crannog Centre and Moulin and Pitlock Cree Heritage Centre.
Thank you very much. Anything else? No? Can we agree the minutes of the previous meeting?
Agreed.
Thanks, Convener. I'm not contesting the minute. I think that's an accurate representation of the last meeting, but I did want to ask about item 10, Fairer Communities for All. At the last meeting, we agreed the process for the Community Investment Fund and the participatory budgeting. It's come to my attention that community groups have been told that unless they attended the Fairer Communities for All meetings, they could not apply to the Fairer Communities for All funding, and I wondered whether that was part of what we had agreed at the last meeting. It's also come to my attention that we agreed that there would be 3 themes, which were the cost of living, working in partnership and working in partnership with communities, and creating a resilient local green economy, but the only theme that has made it through into the application form is the cost of living, and I wondered whether that was in line with what we agreed at the last meeting.
The first part of your question, I can certainly comment on what I experienced in Rattray, and that wasn't the case, that attendance was requested to input into the system, but that wasn't a method by which application would be chosen. The second part of it, I've not seen the application form, so I'll need Elaine Ritchie be the only officer here who possibly could probably answer anything on this, but maybe the officers need to get back to you. But there should not be anything different from what we passed on the basis of what you're raising.
I just need to get clarification from David Stoker, because that's not my understanding either. I thought there was 3 themes, but I will double check and agree with Convener in terms of the first point, that attendance at the meeting wasn't a prerequisite for access to the funds.
So thank you for raising this, because I think it is important that this new process is done correctly, and obviously it's getting done in each and every ward, so sometimes things will be said, but I think you're right to raise it so we can iron these things out and the process happen correctly.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Strategic Leader.
Councillor Brown.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's just a technical thing. Councillor Anderson was going to be sitting in for Councillor James, and he needs an invite to come in. He can't seem to get in. Could you send one in for him?
I'll leave Democratic Services to deal with that. So are we happy to approve the minutes of the previous meeting? Thank you very much. Outstanding business statement. Can we note the updates and remove any completed actions? I'm not seeing any questions to the contrary, so we'll take it as suggested. So we're now on to item 5 of our agenda, which is Police Scotland thematic update about the Public Protection Unit. Can I ask DCI Graham Templar to provide the committee with an update on this Public Protection Unit, please? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, convener. Ladies and gentlemen, as stated, I'm Graham Templar. I'm a newly appointed Detective Chief Inspector for Public Protection Investigations across Tayside. And I was fortunate enough to be asked by local area commander Greg Burns to give an input on public protection, particularly what we would class as Group 2 crime. Now, obviously, I appreciate there's a wealth of differing experiences and skills across the room. So I've pitched it at a fairly medium level. There will be some that will probably know a lot of this stuff already. Others it may be new to you, and I'd happily take questions at the end. But I'm looking to give an overview of the nature of the crime, Tayside Division's response to it, some of the divisional structures, some of the issues and challenges that we face locally. Share a little bit of data to hopefully back up some of the points that I look to make, and as I said, questions at the end, which I'm happy to take, or indeed pass on my details to Greg so that it can be contact afterwards, discuss any aspect thereafter. When we talk about Group 2 crime, obviously when we talk about different stages of crime, clearly we're talking about Group 2 relating to sexual crime, including rape, attempt rape, sexual assault, voyeurism, indecent exposure, sexual abuse, online sexual offending, including adult, child and vulnerable victims. It clearly covers a wide spectrum of sexual offending, from the sexual abuse of children right through to rapes committed by strangers. It's obviously a very broad term covering that sort of space, and is something that undoubtedly, as I'll demonstrate throughout, is growing in demand. All 13 geographic divisions across Scotland, and to a lesser extent forces in England and Wales, follow this broad public protection departmental structure, which I'll outline. And within Tayside, we've taken the decision to split the public protection area of business into 2 sections with various sub-departments in each half. I'm the Tayside lead for the investigation side of the business, and whilst we're currently recruiting for a lead in the safeguarding side of the business, following the recent retirement of DCI Jennifer Reid, who some of you will undoubtedly know. That space at the moment is being covered by Acting Detective Chief Inspector Keir Smith, who's got a background like me in the public protection space and has done it for a number of years. Within public protection investigations, I have 4 detective inspectors that sit under me. 2 have responsibility for the Divisional Rape Investigation Unit, 1 with responsibility for the Divisional Child Protection Investigation Unit, which within Perth and Kinross sits at Perth Police Station, and also have 1 detective inspector with responsibility for the Divisional Domestic Abuse Investigation Unit. By implementing this split, my teams can focus on the traditional aspects of detective-led investigation, following up leads, interviewing witnesses, gathering evidence and arresting and reporting offenders. Within the rape investigation team, their remit extends to standalone serious sexual offending that doesn't have, in most cases, additional domestic offending linked in with that. Domestic abuse unit, as the name would suggest, is serious sexual offending, but with those related within a domestic hue, or indeed domestic offences relating to current or indeed ex-partners. And the child protection team relate to offences perpetrated against child victims 18 years or younger, even if the report is non-recent and the victim is now an adult. So as you can imagine, there's a significant number of non-recent offences that they deal with where victims are now adults reporting from offences that were committed against them as children. We've decided on that split, and as you can imagine, there's a lot of overlap between them because a number of these offences carry on aspects of all these areas of business. So there's always a discussion and detail as to who the investigation best sits with, often depending on skills, experience and specialisms. Within the public protection safeguarding arena, which focus obviously is providing that wraparound scaffolding and support for victims and vulnerable individuals, there are units to take an overview of the child protection IRD system, the newly appointed SCIM interviews, which I'm sure we've had inputs on in the recent past, and child protection processes, along with a dedicated adult safeguarding unit that looks at measures to protect those adults with vulnerabilities or disabilities. The safeguarding side also encapsulates sex offender policing, domestic abuse safeguarding, with contributions to local MARAC and internal MATAC processes, which are aimed at identifying and protecting the most at-risk victims and targeting those suspects that are most prolific and pose most risk. As you can imagine, as I said, significant overlap, but we look to ensure that staff can build up experience and knowledge of all areas. I myself have previously worked in a variety of these specialisms throughout my service, and previously in charge as Detective Inspector of our Concern Hub, which encapsulates the child and adult safeguarding teams. To put it simply, there's an absolute recognition within the police that public protection work is one of the biggest and ever-growing areas of police investigation, and our spread of resources reflects that, with at least 2/3 of divisional detectives working within the public protection space. As a national organisation, though, we can reach out to additional national units in the Domestic Abuse Task Force, who investigate the most serious of domestic offenders, or indeed the National Rape Task Force, who can bring additional specialist skills in the most complex rape and sexual abuse investigations. We also have the National Child Abuse Investigation Unit, again investigating the most significant or complex abuse of children. Sometimes we reach out to tap into their resources, their experience, or their additional specialisms, for instance around forensic evidence recovery, computer investigation, or interviewing of witnesses. In terms of the investigation of Group 2 crime, we start at the very basis of engaging with victims and look to gain comprehensive victim accounts by specially trained sexual offence liaison officers, SOLOs, embedded as part of public protection investigation teams who undertake a 5-day training course at Police College, receiving guidance on a variety of aspects, including evidence gathering, forensic considerations, and significantly the impact of trauma on witness recall. Investigations are directed by trained and accredited senior investigating officers, usually at the rank of Detective Inspector. We can also call on specialisms in terms of crime scene management, CCTV and house-to-house coordinators, as well as human trafficking tactical advisors, to name just a few of the additional specialisms which an SIO may consider necessary to utilise as part of an investigation. All offences involving child victims are investigated by specially trained child protection investigators, and for any child reporting serious sexual offending, they'll be supported to provide their evidence under the Scottish Child Interview Model, the SCIM model as referenced earlier, and will be seen in suitable facilities across Tayside. That gives an overview and a flavour of what the structure is around this growing area of business. But in terms of the challenges, we're obviously seeing divisional and national increases in the report of Group 2 crime. However, I'm pleased to report that a deep dive into figures across the division, which I've undertaken recently, confirms much of what we already know. That increased reporting demonstrates a level of confidence and awareness amongst the public. The reports will be taken seriously and investigated thoroughly. I also think there's a wider social conversation going on, prompted by recent campaigns, including the Me Too campaign, endorsed by significant public figures. I think, for instance, of Nicky Campbell reporting on the abuse that he suffered at Edinburgh Academy, that go some way to taking away the stigma that previously was associated with reporting, particularly around about non-recent abuse of children. In short, there's less public tolerance that such offences should be hidden, perhaps traditionally because of shame or fear, or indeed, unfortunately, the view that they would not be believed if they reported it. Much of these increases in Group 2 offending, which I should stress can fluctuate significantly from month to month, hinges on non-recent crime reports. And by that I mean offences that are reported now, but have occurred months or even years ago. Despite the complexity of such investigations, these non-recent crime reports should be interpreted in positive terms, as they clearly demonstrate a willingness by complainers to engage with the police, even regarding older matters, confident they'll be listened to and the reports acted upon. Obviously, though, this creates the impression amongst the wider public that sexual offending is ever increasing. And I should stress that current sexual offending is ever increasing. It's my view that whilst we do grow more familiar with offending types, which can evolve and develop, as seen by changes in legislation to tackle the distastefully named revenge porn, or voyeurism in the guise of the awful offence that's been recently reported in terms of upskirting, it's clear that any significant increase in reports is driven overwhelmingly by two aspects: non-recent reporting and online offending. In an aside, but linked to that, as police investigators and the wider police and public partners become more familiar with a new piece of legislation, we can expect its usage to increase. It does not mean that offences are necessarily increasing in that area, but more that we're better able to identify that as a specific crime, something that was previously not identified. Whilst not a Group 2 crime, a good example of that would be coercive control in terms of domestic abuse legislation. As recorded data offences continue to increase as we better understand the situations for which it can be applied to, something that previously would have gone unreported and unrecorded. The public perception when we talk about increases in sexual offending is often that we have a rapist at large attacking women in the public space. The reality is, thankfully, that stranger attacks, though undoubtedly deeply alarming, are thankfully quite rare. Actually, data tells us the growing majority of sexual offending takes place in the online world, and our policing footprint needs to evolve with it. More challenging when servers are located overseas or virtual networks are now even more private and utilize a variety of increasingly sophisticated measures to disguise their location. But again, nationally, we have the access to some units that continue to evolve and develop investigative tools to tackle this area of offending. And as it becomes more sophisticated, so too do our measures to combat it. The vast majority of Group 2 contact offences take place in the private space and are perpetrated by people that the victim knows, often a partner or ex-partner, or a family member, friend, or associate. Rarely is it perpetrated by a stranger. Clearly, with that private space offending, our ability to directly intervene becomes more challenging, and that's where the assistance of multi-agency partners becomes absolutely vital, with the need to tackle misogyny, toxic masculinity, and educate our young people on positive relationships and acceptable boundaries. We also have to acknowledge the trauma that such offences can have on victims, some of whom understandably develop mental health concerns as a result and often self-medicate with drugs and alcohol, which can in turn expose them to further sexual harm. There's absolutely a relationship between vulnerability and exposure to offending. This awful situation can be difficult to break out of. Beyond the horrendous direct impact on victims, it can make engagement in the evidence gathering stage particularly challenging. We often have victims who are simply not fit enough to provide key information, are in need of significant planned and complex support, or indeed can disengage at any point. And without buy-in from the victim, our investigations can stall, denying the justice they so deserve. Beyond impacting on the ability to solve and report these offences, importantly, it means that offenders remain at liberty. And whilst we implement safety measures based on a range of tools, including restriction orders, many intervention tactics available to the police rely on a legal basis, which can be harder to evidence without evidenced court processes, which again, in turn, relies on our victims to engage and see it right through the criminal justice process. Now, I've rattled through a lot of general information and sort of high-level strategic comments, mostly formed through a long experience in the public protection world. And I'll just provide some data which hopefully reinforces some of the points that I've made there. And I take them in respect of Perth and Kinross. So within Q1, between the 1st of April 2025 and the 30th of June 2025, there were 103 recorded Group 2 offences committed within Perth and Kinross. Of that, 15 related to rape or attempted rape of adult victims. Of those rapes or attempted rapes that took place in public, there was only one. And that rape was reported 14 months after the incident took place. Of the number of those rapes or attempted rapes that were non-recent, were 6. So of that 15, we're talking about 6 that were non-recent. And of that 103 overall Group 2 crimes, 57 were non-recent. 48 of those offences, of the 103, relate to online communication offences, including sharing of intimate images, indecent communications with a child, or the majority aspect of offending, which is some way connected to communication devices and are not in-person offending. Approximately 50% of any offences that were committed in public were within bars, cafes, schools, HMP Perth, libraries and leisure centres. But please bear in mind that for any communication offence to be reported, the actual locus, the location where the message or communication took place, is actually wholly incidental to the locus. Because as we've talked about in the past, we have to adapt and evolve, and actually online world is another place and another location that we have to consider. So we're used to operating in a world of space where we can talk about streets, addresses and road names, but actually the online world is a location all of its own, and something we need to adapt and evolve along with. In terms of the takeaways that would be really keen for people to understand and perhaps explore further, the reporting of non-recent crime particularly has a very significant and often unpredictable impact on crime figures from month to month. An increase in Group 2 crime does not automatically mean that we have an upturn in current offending. In most cases, it's actually evidence of growing confidence in reporting to police and a wider public awareness of the unacceptable nature of certain actions and activities that may have once been quietly accepted or indeed ignored. A significant proportion of Group 2 crime involves non-contact communication offences, either through the unwanted sharing of indecent images or texts, and can include so-called sextortion offences. When we talk about contact sexual crime, as in victim and perpetrator in the same location, much of that takes place in the private space, not public, and most perpetrators of that type of crime are known to the victim. Indeed, one of the single biggest majority of offender types is those that has been in a romantic relationship with the victim. So we talk about domestic offending, which has a clear overlap into this area of business. Victims of sexual crime are often heavily impacted by these offences, which makes their ability to engage with the investigative process even more challenging. They require more support at every stage of the investigative process and the wider criminal justice system. And I would suggest that there's a proportion of victims who subsequently disengage from the process is far higher than many other crime types because of the demands and challenging nature, and indeed the trauma that such horrendous offending has on them. Now, I've rattled through a number of facts and figures there, and hopefully given an overview and a flavour of some of the offending. The key points for me are that, and I'm particularly related to scrutiny, as aware that Greg obviously answers for Perth and Kinross in terms of policing response, is that I would highlight that Group 2 crime and an increase in recorded offending quarter to quarter doesn't automatically mean, as sometimes the public believe, that we have a significant upturn in contact offending. Often the non-recent aspect can ebb and flow depending on time of year and variety of other, and indeed probably linked in some cases, in my experience, to media campaigns and increased awareness as well. So it shouldn't follow that there should be an automatic additional concern there because of an increase. Obviously, we take it seriously and investigate it, but by and large, the experience can be, the figures can be accounted through that dual aspect of non-recent offending and indeed online offending as well, which sadly is ever increasing. I'll pause there and look to turn over to the floor and take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. And the question I'd like to ask is, it seems evident from what you've said to us today that the growth in online issues around abuse is something that's there, and obviously for children, in our education committee here, we've obviously had rules come through about mobile phone use in schools, etc. So I was just wondering what input you have with our education system to help in the education of young people with the use of phones, sharing of information, and the risks that they can expose themselves to, so that they understand this, because education is obviously some of the way around.
Absolutely.
Do that. Do you have any other questions? Haley Ahern. Sorry. I'm sorry, Deeside Temple, we're having a technical issue here. I'll need to pause you on your answer.
If in doubt, switch it off and start again. Okay. Yeah, in respect of the question, absolutely. For those that are managed as in convicted offenders, then clearly they're subject to notification requirements in sex offender policing, which is something that's well governed in terms of MAPA. In respect to those, there are more limited measures available, but there are restriction orders that can still be applied. And obviously, importantly, the risk assessment is undertaken for all those that go through that process. And we absolutely would be looking for some form of sex offender restriction notice in respect to those most high tariff offenders that have yet to see conviction or indeed yet to have those restrictions imposed. And we would have that discussion, we have that governance structure existing, because absolutely there's that long delay sometimes, unfortunately, between cases running through the court system to conviction and sentencing, which we have to tackle with. But yeah, again, it's all based around that risk assessment. And I think for those that are most significant that come through the criminal justice process, we probably look for input from our sex offender policing unit as the experts in the management of offenders to go guidance in terms of applying those restrictions. But in short, yes, absolutely, there are restrictions that can be applied, and those that are most significant are identified and restrictions imposed upon them.
Thank you with that. Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Convener, and thank you for your presentation. You mentioned the figure 103 in the last quarter. I don't know how that compares previously, but you also obviously mentioned there's obviously historic crimes coming through as well, which obviously it's bad. They have to be investigated. Obviously, it's bad enough. But when the figures are obviously publicised for the press, 103, do you actually differentiate between what's historic and what's current? Because there's a feeling if the figures do start to go up because of historic crimes being reported, as you said earlier in your report, the public may suddenly fear there's a mass increase in sexual crime. So do you actually publicise these figures slightly differently to give that impression to people that there isn't a massive increase?
I would think not routinely, if I'm honest, and I think that's probably where we as an organisation need to be a bit more, think more smartly about highlighting that. We want to make sure there's, because we're well aware of that difference between the perception of concern over these obviously alarming figures, but also the reality in terms of what they represent in regards, particularly the non-recent aspects. So no, I think that we're probably not very good at highlighting that aspect. I think we could do better. I think opportunities like this exist so we can make it clear to the public that there is context to all these figures. I mean, ultimately, if we take them as they are, we assume, understandably, for those that are uninvolved in this area of business, that they represent current, ongoing, in most cases, contact offences, and clearly the picture is dramatically different. So I think we're probably not as good as we should be about highlighting that non-recent aspect. And certainly I'm keen as lead for the investigation side of the Tay side to take every opportunity to give some level of context to that, so people are better informed, because otherwise, out of context, that fear and that perception increases when actually it's in some cases unwarranted.
Thank you very much. Bailey Williamson.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned in your presentation about people trafficking, and I was just wondering on your view on some of the legislation that surrounds some of the things such as nail bar legislation. I know a number of councils have tried to introduce an entertainment license to manage nail bars, but I'm just wondering what your view is and whether a further step should be taken to try and manage that.
It's a significantly complex area of business, obviously related in many cases to serious and organised crime. And I would say that rather than focus on nail bars specifically, focusing on any predominantly cash business that can be put up relatively quickly, has little in the way of safeguards on it, and can employ a large number of people in a sort of quick turnover, and therefore obviously has the potential for exploitation. I would have to say I think that it's an ever growing area of concern, and I'm not sure, speaking personally, that we have got the approach right yet, but I think it's one that we are learning and growing with as it continues to evolve. But absolutely, we are aware, conscious, and I don't just say relate to nail bar specifically. I think there are other high, quick cash businesses, for instance, car washes, that have traditionally been seen as a place where you might employ a number of people potentially through exploitation, by not paying fair wages, by not giving fair standards and conditions, and then indeed questionable reporting in terms of tax and revenue. But in terms of the legislation around that, I absolutely would encourage us to do more and go further, because I think we're starting to see an increase of these businesses bleeding into other aspects of public protection in terms of associated exploitation. And by that, I also include sexual crime.
Thank you. My apologies, Councillor Mayor. My little system in front of me failed me. Your question, please.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, DCI Templar, for your very interesting, informative presentation. My question relates to the comment you made where you said that stranger attacks in public places are thankfully rare. I'm sure that's something we're all delighted to hear, but I just wonder, rare as they are, is there any evidence to show that where they do happen, there is any increase in the number being committed by asylum seekers, as is being alleged by the hotel protesters across Tayside? Thank you.
That's obviously a very sensitive area, but what I would say is I think that unfortunately, it probably in some ways relates to the previous point about that perception aspect, which clearly then in turn it leads to more focus. I'm actually not sure it's a question that we would have asked, particularly maybe 3 or 4 years ago. We would have just been aware that it was a significantly serious offence, and the background of the offender would only related to it in terms of sexual offending. What their ethnicity or indeed how they came to be in the country may be less of a priority. Unfortunately, I think the dialogue has shifted somewhat, and that seems to be the focus for many. I'm not seeing anything at this stage that indicates that we have a significant issue in that regard, other than above and beyond the absolute appalling nature of some of these offences and the fact that they deserve our full investigation. The victims require support. What I would have to say is it's something we're now probably being forced to be made much more aware of and ask the questions. Rightly or wrongly remains to be seen. I would say it's too early to know for sure, but we are starting to ask the questions more about whether that's relevant or not, probably because of the public dialogue about it. But I've not seen anything that indicates that there is a significant increase in, for instance, stranger attacks that are as a result of someone's entry into the country being a key factor in that offending. Will there be asylum seekers and indeed illegal migrants that commit sexual offending in this country? Absolutely. Will there be also born and bred Scottish, national, British, whatever individuals commit these offences? Absolutely. And indeed, I would think it's probably too early to say whether proportionately there's an increase in one area as opposed to other. But that's not something that I've yet seen. But absolutely something we're now, because of the dialogue, having to be much more aware of. And as I said, you can debate the rightness of that given the sort of direction of travel nationally.
Thank you very much. Councillor McCall for your first question.
Thank you, and nice to see you again. Councillor Mayor has sort of asked a bit of the question that I wanted to ask you about, and what I wanted to really ask, because I know that obviously a lot of information is data driven, and what I really wanted to know was whether there'd be any increase in reported crimes or incidents as a result of people being housed in hotels here, or people who are seeking asylum being housed in hotels here locally.
I think it probably relates to one of my earlier points, probably inadvertently, that as perception or public perception increases, or indeed public awareness, then there's naturally an increase in, or likely to be an increase in reported offences. I don't have the data available to say whether specifically that has seen a significant increase, because I said it's not been something that's been so significant that we've had to necessarily take specific note of. So I can't comment on individual figures, but I would expect, in the same way as I commented on domestic abuse legislation continues to increase as more people have a growing awareness of what it relates to and therefore more comfortable reporting it. I would think if the public awareness of a particular crime type becomes more commonplace, we would see more reports being made. To say whether or not that suggests there's an increase in crime is actually a different question, because, as I said, for a variety of reasons, some of these things are not reported or indeed recorded. So the baseline may not be an accurate reflection of the entire picture, and we're well aware that data only captures some aspect of it, albeit we're clearly increasingly confident with the data that we have. But I would say that it's one I've got to be cautious about, because I'm always going to be very conscious that as and when there's more of a public dialogue about a particular offence type or indeed a particular issue, that we will see an increase, a sort of corresponding increase in reports of that nature. But we have to just be careful about what that actually means and what we interpret from that, because, as I said, sometimes it's as much about public perception as it is actually about the reality of offending.
Thank you. I think you're correct about public perception. There's a perception that there's been a big increase in reported crime, and it's purely anecdotal. And when anybody comes to us as councillors with concerns, we have no reported crime to back it up with. So thank you for your answer. That's extremely helpful. My second question really is around the more public protection piece, and two parts of it. You mentioned quite a lot about child protection, and obviously I am involved with the Adult Protection Committee. How do those two areas work together, and particularly with social work, to try and provide the whole public protection coverage, I suppose, if you want, between social care and social wellbeing side of the work that we do here in the council and the work that you do in the police? Thank you.
Well, I'd have to say, in terms of the child and adult protection, I think there's ever increasing recognition of the significant overlaps. I think traditionally they have stood on as sort of separate pillars. I think more often than we see nationally, and particularly in other areas of Tayside, moving towards a public protection approach, which is a combined, all-inclusive, all-encompassing approach rather than individual spheres, and particularly in its most basic form with the recognition that the age of a child is increased. In some cases, the local authority has a responsibility up to the age of 25 for those that have been local authority care. We have to accept that there's an ever increasing recognition that it's not standalone, and as is previously perhaps in 5 or 10 years ago, we would see a sort of a 16-year-old having gone through the child protection processes and then almost left to it. I think there's absolutely a positive direction of travel, that we see a recognition of responsibility and investment right through into a young adulthood. Certainly within Perth and Kinross, I think that absolutely, having been involved previously in both child and adult protection committees, I would say there's a growing awareness of the need to have that working side by side, and indeed potentially consider whether there's any opportunity for joint working or indeed overlaps. Also, obviously covering in Dundee separately, they've recently moved to a sort of public protection committee approach, recognising both have an overlap. But do we need to do more in that space? Absolutely, because we need to be more aware that we need to have that sort of all-inclusive approach rather than what's previously happened, which has been an age barrier particularly as it has a much longer lasting impact. I think specifically of trauma, which can have much far-reaching consequences than simply stopping at age 16, as has previously been approached. But yeah, we can absolutely do more in that space. But I think it's positive that we're starting to see grassroots in that area.
Thank you very much. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, convener. It's just a clarification, really. And thank you, DCI Templar. It was just, you mentioned in your presentation about working nationally with other partners. I just wondered, is that resources within Scotland, or does that also include UK-wide public protection agencies? Thank you.
Absolutely includes national organisations. I think specifically the National Crime Agency, which we have direct links in through our campus at Gartcosh. The Scottish Crime Campus has National Crime Agency officers working out with to provide that direct direct relationship with. Obviously, we have positive relations with and contact on an ongoing basis with partners in border agency, indeed in revenue and customs, as well as other national organisations. For instance, as part of the NCA, but was previously a standalone. We have the Child Online Exploitation Programme. Obviously, they're now been subsumed into the National Crime Agency, but we have a sort of working relationship with them. And obviously, a lot of our training, a lot of our skills and specialisms are rooted through the National College of Policing, which is open to English and Welsh forces as well. So we obviously cross-train in regard to that, because unfortunately, a lot of trends that we see in the public protections space are obviously reflected across the country. So that wealth of experience and that wealth of knowledge is obviously available to all. I mean, even simply, I have to say, when I speak with my DIs, I tend to think there's probably not a problem that we face that hasn't been explored by someone somewhere in this, either in Scotland or indeed more widely. And we look to tap into that. Why reinvent the wheel if there's a successful approach that can already be applied? So absolutely, we look to partner as much as we can with national organisations. Now, those are obviously in the enforcement side, but clearly we've also got relations with Women's Aid, with support agencies for victims of both domestic abuse and child sexual trauma as well, because ultimately the support of the victims has to be part and parcel of everything we do. So we have that at a local level with really positive relationships within Perth and Kinross, but obviously more widely as well. And sometimes just having that ability to level up to national organisations can bring access to specific services or specialisms that we wouldn't otherwise come across in our day-to-day business.
Sir Barrett.
Thanks, convener. The aspect that we haven't touched on so far, I think, is in terms of the investigation success rate or detection rate for rape crimes. And can you tell us how we compare in Perth to Dundee and Angus and the other parts of Tayside and in Scotland?
I don't have the specific figures available to me right now, but obviously, well, one aspect, and obviously pass that on. What I would say is, as lead for this agency, we're sitting at this area of business, we're sitting round about, in terms of rape solvency, we're probably sitting at about 72% of all rapes are currently being solved and reported. That's absolutely significant figure, and one that shouldn't be underplayed. That's I would have to say that's not uncommon. I think that's probably something that's reflected nationally as well. We sit quite well within the pack in terms of other geographical divisions in terms of how our performance relates. But I think that's certainly from having worked in this area for a number of years, I think that's probably as significant a solvency figure, a performance figure that as I've ever come across. Much of that relates to the Lord Advocate's guidelines, the references that they've changed, which makes it easier for people to report, makes it easier for us to report the circumstances of offences to the Crown for them to consider, and as a result has made offences that were previously otherwise unreportable because of a deemed lack of sufficiency of evidence to now be available to sit with the Crown for them to reconsider and indeed put to trial. So that has made a significant change to the way we do our business. Other aspects in terms of the essential elements of a crime that we would need to prove are have changed because the focus and recognition has been on the impact that such offences have on victims. So as a result, we understand that it can't be treated in the same way as if someone's reporting the theft of their mobile phone, or indeed, a stolen car. There's a much more significant impact of trauma and distress and disclosures that have now rightfully been given the recognition, and as a result, we can now report more widely probably than we have ever been able to do, and that'll have only a positive impact on our performance going forward as we look to, and I would imagine, look to solve more and more of these offences, because the ability and recognition within the fiscal service is that there's an appetite for that to happen, for us to share that information with them, which we otherwise would have probably been unable to report, because as you can imagine, the nature of these offences is in most cases very private. And indeed, the idea of having multiple witnesses is very rare. So absolutely, now the focus is on the victim's account, the victim's experience, and indeed probably more creative in terms of how we can look to acknowledge evidence that previously wouldn't have been accounted for. But in terms of the question with respect to solvency, yep, absolutely, it's very positive figures. Can we do more? Absolutely, and we will look to see that. But I would say that we're sitting around about that sort of percentage in terms of solvency, and it compares favourably. I mean, what I should highlight is, as I supervise a divisional unit that has responsibility for all three local authorities within Tayside. They give due attention to each area in terms of the crimes that are reported. So the solvency tends to sit around about that mark, and obviously is given fair weighting across. But it's certainly a very positive picture, I would say. But obviously we're not complacent. We have more to do.
Thank you very much, Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Convener. I suppose my question comes back to, I mean, the crime is here, the numbers are here. I suppose it comes down to a fact of what can society do, I suppose, to try and change this. It seems to be something that's here with us. I mean, do we need more police officers to investigate? Do we need a stronger deterrent at judicial level? Do we need to control perhaps more the social media, the Facebook, internet? Do we? You mentioned education. Do we need to educate people about the effects of alcohol and drug abuse, both for offender and victim? Or do we need to go right back to basics? And I presume most crimes are committed by men. So do we need to go back to school and just educate boys and teenagers to respect women again? Do we need to go back to that level? Do we need to bring parents into it? I mean, is there something that can be done? It's a horrendous crime. Is there something that we as a society can do?
Absolutely, I think education is key. I think that, and a reference to there, I think understanding at sadly a very young age now about what constitutes a healthy relationship, what the expectations are from all involved, needs to be addressed. I think there needs to be a wider understanding of what is and isn't acceptable in terms of conduct. I mean, we see offending, particularly around about domestic offending, and indeed to a lesser extent sexual crime, becoming more prevalent around younger age groups, and I think part of that will undoubtedly be the influence of misogynist individuals who've gained public attention, and they perpetuate and produce a model of how to conduct their life, which is absolutely abhorrent, but seems to garner public attention and interest. Our boys, because it is predominantly men that are offenders of sexual offending and domestic abuse, that's something bones about that, do need to have clear role models, clear positive role models with clear positive understanding of how to conduct relationships, how to conduct themselves, what is and isn't acceptable. I think we do have a responsibility as society to ask more of our social media providers, to expect them to be more decisive in taking action against inappropriate or alarming content. I think too often even controversial content is seen as welcomed by social media networks, because ultimately it garners views and therefore garners attention, and ultimately garners advertisement and therefore revenue. I think there needs to be more responsibility placed upon them and be held to account at the most highest levels, because ultimately that's where it needs to stop. Because there's a whole generation of children who, in many cases, take what they're told that's available to them through this wonderful device that they have with them at all times, that gives them an indication of how they should live their life and what's acceptable and what's not. And often, unfortunately, in some cases, it's absolutely skewed. So we've got a duty to address that view, to change that view, but also to furnish them with an alternative, a clear alternative that documents what is acceptable and what isn't. Because I think in many cases there's those that are simply left unclear because they see it perpetuated in where they get their information from, which, as I said, tends to come through social media. We also need to be better in terms of, as an organisation, the police, but also as a local authority in combating that with our own positive messaging as well, providing that counterpoint and making sure that people are aware that there are alternatives, and they should be more cautious in what they accept at face value. I mean, we used to talk about, you know, reading multiple newspapers to get a true sense of what the news actually was. Obviously, you know, print journalism is a distant memory to many children, but what they take on that is what they see in social media. So we need to be putting messaging out there that actually provides an alternative, a clear, you know, trusted alternative to the media that they absorb. Parents absolutely play a part, you know, setting an example, scrutinizing what their children are doing, you know, what they're involved in, who they're communicating with, what they should and shouldn't be doing, and giving, again, clear boundaries, because I think sometimes it's about the lack of knowledge as to where the limits and boundaries should be. And that's something we all, you know, as members of society, have a duty to impress upon our young people. But also we need to be supportive of open conversations about it as well. There needs to be less that's hidden. And I mean, I commented that that's the positive thing that we go in terms of non-recent crime, is that it is more and more commonplace to have people reporting aspects of offending, particularly that they suffered as children, that in the past would not have been reported. And I think that can only be seen in positive light, that we make these things, we bring these things to light, and we make them absolutely unacceptable. And therefore remove that stigma that prevents people reporting, because these things don't thrive in the light. They tend to wither when they're exposed, and we just need to be able to support them. As part of that, clearly we need to invest in supporting those that have been victimized as well. We absolutely need to make that, because we understand the wide-ranging impact and complexity. And as I touched upon there, I don't have the figures, but it's a comment from myself that my fear is those that have been victims of abuse are often victimized again by others because of their vulnerabilities, because of their additional challenges and complexities, because of their lack of support, because of the lack of belief in getting out, in getting help. And we as a society have a duty to protect those that are most vulnerable.
Thank you very much. Councillor Duff.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Graham, for the presentation. As you've heard from your presentation this morning, and as we understand from what Group 2 offences are and the work of the Public Protection Unit, it probably could be argued to say it contains some of the most harrowing types of cases that a police officer would have to deal with during their career. And I just wondered if you felt that yourself and your officers, you know, got the support that you required in terms of having to deal with the stresses and the trauma, if you like, of being the investigating officer in some of these cases, and whether there are things like, is there a restriction on how long someone can serve in a public protection unit, just in relation to their own sort of mental health? Thanks.
Thank you very much for the question. It's actually, you know, ever increasingly appropriate. I think there's a recognition now in the police that working in this sphere of business is particularly impactful. There is, you know, we do recognise vicarious trauma now more than we ever have. Is there a time limit on officers serving the public protection? No. Should there be? It's certainly a question to consider. I mean, we think back to my 22 years in the job, the vast majority of it in public protection, you know, investigating and dealing with some particularly harrowing cases. It undoubtedly has an impact. You know, it can, if left unchecked, lead to a very bleak view on society, and indeed, you know, others. What I would say is there is, through that recognition, an ever-increasing availability of support for public protection officers, not just in sort of normal process we consider in terms of employee assistance and whatever else, but more in terms of specialist support, roundabout counselling to understand the impact of trauma. I don't know that it goes far enough yet. I think it's positive that it recognises for the first time, I would suggest, probably in the last 3 to 4 years, a real recognition that the impact that this area of business can have on the officers investigating it, many of whom, I should stress, work in that for much of their career, because of the additional specialisms that they gain from investigating it, because of the particular level of skill and experience it requires to be able to operate in that environment for any length of time. You do see a number of officers, working in that area of business for a long time, much of their career, and the impact is undoubtedly significant. But beyond sort of local check-ins and whatnot, there is a significant amount of specialist support available that to give to that. But as I said, the key point there is the recognition that actually, if we don't address this, we are saving up significant problems for a vast proportion of police officers in the future who have had to undertake some of the most harrowing work. But it is definitely moving in the right direction. But much like other aspects, we still have a lot to do, because I think we're only starting to understand the full impact of it, not just on individual officers, but on the scope of the issue as well. Because, as I said, there's a number of officers working in public protection who have worked in that area for most of their career. And I think here we are now, nearly 22 years on, we're actually having conversations about it, which were something that was probably unheard of 15 years ago.
Sorry, and many who probably have children of the same age as the ones that they're dealing with as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smith.
Yep, here we go. Thank you very much, first of all, for the presentation. Right, I think Councillor Braun and Councillor Duff asked a couple of questions for myself. That is that there's so much on the media nowadays, okay, that do you ever get people, for instance, come up to you and say, almost like copycatting what they've seen on some of these media platforms, and you keep data for that? In other words, you can have something to go back and say, look, this is not acceptable. The other thing that really worries me about public protection is that these people are amongst us. We don't know who they are in many ways, right? And one surprised me one time I witnessed one of these stings, and the perpetrator was beside a school. And I thought that was quite horrendous to know that was in there that nobody really knew about. So we have to be on our guard all the time. I think people, youngsters especially. But the biggest thing for me was, very much in America, when you hear these horrendous shootings and things like that, the copycat, it worries me. And I haven't seen these things, by the way, but on television, because I'm not into these games, things like that, they're absolutely horrendous. And if there is evidence, do you keep it, and do you go to the media and say, look, this is not acceptable?
In respect to copycat offending, it would be so unusual as to stand out, I would think. I can't think of a particular example in my career where that would match. The only thing I can liken it to is when an offence is reported that garners significant local attention, usually through the media, there can be similar reports forthcoming. What I would say that's either as a result of people now having the confidence to report because they see it publicly demonstrated, and therefore have a feeling that they can now share this information that they previously would have kept to themselves, thinking they wouldn't have been believed, or indeed that the police wouldn't have treated it professionally, but thankfully now are accepting of that, and therefore more willing to come forward. In terms of copycat offending, are you suggesting that suspects take motivation or take inspiration, if you like, as horrible as that word be for this, from offending to commit further similar offences? I'd have to say that's not been my experience. That's absolutely not been my experience. If anything, the dialogue has always been about how appalling it is. And as I said, the only thing that comes from that is that we have more reports of offending, but not because there's more offenders, but because people now have the confidence to say, clearly this is something that was previously private, but is now public, and I'm prepared to share my account for something that might well be similar, but ultimately isn't necessarily connected to the original offence. In some cases, that can be that can actually be the case. We can all think of cases where individuals have been publicised, and undoubtedly, as a result of their offending, other victims are now able to feel confident to come forward saying, that individual actually abused me too. And I can see that now in the public domain, I feel comfortable enough to report it. But I didn't know there was other people in the same position as me. I didn't know that the police would deal with it. I didn't even believe that anything would happen from it. But I can see this person going to court now, and I now have the confidence to report and share, what happened to me. That's probably more my experience than individuals taking inspiration from heinous crime to carry out further similar offences. And in respect of the second part of the question around about sort of some of the groups of individuals who decide to target sex offenders, kind of what we call the online sort of online groups, the so-called self-styled paedophile hunters, as they are obviously more commonplace. I'm very, very cautious about their position. I understand that a lot they garner a lot of support because people feel they're doing a positive service for the community. What I would say is many of them have little, if any, understanding of legal process. They can get it wrong, and I've been involved in inquiries where they have got it horrendously wrong, accusing people without basis, without evidence, that has led to people having to be rehoused, relocated, or indeed been victim of further crime unfairly and incorrectly because of their allegations and assertions. So I am very, very cautious about their involvement, and when things are reported to us, we obviously deal with it professionally. We will engage with them if they have evidence, and we will take that and we will look at it and examine it and then take action as appropriate. But as I said, I would always be cautious about their methods and indeed about their intent as well, because there are a number, and I'm just not always sure that it's just as simple as people would like to believe. And whatever side of the fence people sit on in respect of these groups, ultimately, we are the organisation that is empowered to investigate and report these offences, and we are, when we work, we have clear guidelines, we have clear processes that respect the rule of law, that respect the human rights, and that provide a professional package, if you like, to prosecutors, so that we can actually see a conviction at the end of it, see a realistic chance of a conviction. We have that understanding through training and through experience that many of these groups lack significantly.
Thank you very much. And our last question is from Councillor Nicole.
Thank you. My question really relates to some of the wider issues of adult protection that aren't necessarily garner the headlines. Things like elder abuse, like misuse of guardianship orders, for example, romance fraud, and those sorts of things. And I think one of the most challenging things I find when I'm out and about in communities is helping people understand that that's actually an adult protection issue, and then people are afraid to report it. So I'm wondering what more we can do to take away that type of stigma, because we've seen it successfully done with historical sexual crimes and domestic abuse, and people are more willing to come forward. We can see that by the reporting, even though it's harder to investigate sometimes. But I think there's a whole area of adult protection, therefore public protection issues out there from some of our most vulnerable people in our society. And yet friends and neighbours and families either A, don't recognise it as a crime, and B, even if they do, they're very reluctant to report it for fear of some sort of retribution. And I know that these things are dealt with in complete confidence, where you get the sources from. So what more can we do, either as a councillor group or in conjunction with your unit, to take away some of that fear, but to also educate people in the full scope of adult protection? Thank you.
Absolutely, and I think that there is a growing recognition of other offences that creep into what we would class as adult protection. I even suggest in some cases that aspects of domestic abuse could sit within the adult protection space, given the impact of sustained trauma on the ability to make risk assessment, to make sort of decisions to protect oneself, and these are questions that are being asked and rightfully asked. And I think that's a positive step, that we're actually acknowledging that, because I think too many of these things have been compartmentalised in the past. I think the key difficulty relates in some ways in similarity with child abuse, is that fear and shame aspect. I think particularly amongst elderly members of the community that otherwise are fit and well and feel that they can make decisions for their own benefit, for their own welfare, and feel in many cases embarrassed or ashamed by what has taken place. I think, for instance, of romance fraud is an example of that. But the key aspect, like with child abuse, is to put the blame firmly where it deserves, which is on perpetrators, those that carry it out. And part of that just comes through having that conversation and be willing to share and make something that was private more public, and actually start with having that conversation and detailing what it is, what relates to, and where the blame should sit. And I mean, there have been a number of campaigns in recent memory in respect of particularly online offending, but I think more can be done, because we absolutely need to recognise that, as I said, there's that fear and shame aspect we've probably not got right in terms of the stigma that's associated with it. But even at grassroots level, and particularly when I talk about local groups, particularly where elderly members of the community engage, there needs to be that full and frank conversation about these aspects, because offenders, particularly in terms of online scams, are ever more sophisticated, and it's increasingly difficult to combat. Even younger computer savvy individuals struggle sometimes with the scope and scale of some of these schemes. So we just need to be open and honest about these, and as I said, acknowledge where the blame should lie, and indeed also champion, or indeed advocate when there has been a positive success story in terms of demonstrating what has happened, what was done, and who did it. And we see that at some of the committees when we start to bring lived experience into it. That's the first step in terms of sharing that, is getting that lived experience out so that people can relate to it, can understand it, and indeed see themselves in that story, and then feel more comfortable in sharing. We have to have a duty to do that. And given that we're all living longer and living more healthy lives, we need to understand that the area of adult protection is only going to increase in terms of what it taps into and what it relates to. And we have to acknowledge that and start now, to actually invest in that, because, as I said, it's only going to increase. And I saw that when I previously worked in a previous role in concern hub management, we reached a tipping point where child protection concerns were now being outweighed by adult protection concerns. That what was traditionally considered the most vulnerable in society in terms of our children, the number of concerns was soon outweighed by adult protection concerns. Thankfully, because we're getting better at identifying what actually constitutes a concern of that nature, and start to then have a conversation about what we do about it.
Thank you very much, DCI Templar. Thank you for your time. I think this is a good example of why we do these thematic presentations, updates. We bring experts like yourself into the chamber to tell us how the services run, the demands on yourself, and the pressures. And for something that's very complex, it cuts through some of the simplicity, how some people like to describe some aspects of policing. So thank you very much for your time today. It's always good to have an expert come into the room and give us an update and let us understand these processes and things much better than we did before we came in here this morning. So thank you. Thank you for your time. Mr. Burns, are you wishing to make a statement to the chamber?
Yeah, thank you, convener. I will do. Again, I probably echo the thanks to Graham for coming along and delivering that input, because he made it sound really simple and it cut to the chase as it were. So thank you for that, Graham. I think it's a real positive opportunity to bring different areas of policing business in here for the expertise that we've just spoken about. So thank you. The only real update I have for the committee today is I leave the commander's job on the 25th of October. I'm going to be replaced by Jamie Allen, who's experienced. He's done a number of events in Perth and Kinross, so he'll be a super addition to the LPA. I suppose take this opportunity to thank you and the members for their support throughout the time I've been here. And yeah, pretty much just thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it was appropriate that the whole committee were aware that this was happening. Obviously, he had emailed me on Monday, so thank you very much, and thank you for your kind words in that email. I think that the constructive working that we are doing now with these thematic presentations and the yearly statistics is a good balance, and it's given a great opportunity for the activities of the police service to be described to committee in a public forum like this in a much more detailed and informative way. And I think you've engaged enormously well with that, with the process, and embraced a slightly new way of working during these last few years. So thank you again very much. And of course, I look forward to working with your replacement, Sir Alan. So again, thank you. So we move on to item 6 on our agenda. And before we go to our thematic presentation, Area Commander Todd would like to give us a strategic update.
Thanks, Convener. Before we move on to the presentation from Station Commander Joe Fitzpatrick, I'd just like to provide elected members with an update in a few key areas for my Perth and Kinross, Angus and Dundee area, or PCAD for short, including recent management changes, the development of our local fire and rescue plans, the relocation of our command support vehicle and the current position with the service delivery review. I'll keep this brief and focus on the key points just for your awareness. In terms of the PCAD management team restructure, following recent promotion processes, retirements and appraisal outcomes, I've implemented changes within the PCAD local senior officer area management team. This restructure is designed to provide both development opportunities and long-term stability. A key change is the appointment of temporary Group Commander Mike Rumgay as Group Commander for the Perth and Kinross local area. Mike replaces Group Commander Craig Wallace and brings extensive knowledge and experience with him, having most recently served as a temporary Group Commander for the Aberdeen City and Moray area. These adjustments ensure continued strong leadership across the area while supporting succession planning and staff development. Our local fire and rescue plans works underway in the development of the new local fire and rescue plans. Following discussions with colleagues in strategic planning, performance and communications, it's been agreed that consultation on these new plans will be postponed until spring 2026. This approach will allow the plans to be informed by the outcomes of the current service delivery review consultation, ensuring they are robust and aligned with the service's future direction. Formal approval of the revised timeline is awaited from our senior leadership team and the SFRS board, and further updates will be provided once this is confirmed. Our command support vehicle relocation, the Command Support Unit, or the CSU, is a national resource and is a specialist vehicle deployed to larger or more complex incidents. It provides a mobile base for the incident command team to plan, coordinate and monitor operations, whilst ensuring effective communications with operations control and partner agencies. The CSU, currently based at Blackness Road in Dundee, will shortly be relocated to Forfar Community Fire Station. This move will strengthen resilience across the PCAD area and bolster resources in a strategically important location. All Forfar staff have now received the required training, and the relocation will be implemented as a 12-month trial. At the end of the period, the PCAD management team will review the impact and effectiveness of this change. The Service Delivery Review, SDR, the 12-week public consultation on SDR is now concluded. In total, we received more than 3,500 responses to the online consultation survey. Clearly, we recognise that some of our proposals represent a significant level of change, and I must emphasise that again, no decisions have been made yet. The feedback will now be carefully considered alongside the operational evidence that informed the proposals. This process will be overseen by an independent external research organisation, the DIFLI Partnership. The next steps in the process will include independent analysis of all responses by the DIFLI Partnership, preparation of a consultation report summarising the findings, and recommendations made to the SFRS board for final decision in December 2025. The board will meet on the 18th of December to make final decisions on the outcomes of the SDR. That concludes my update for today. I hope it provides elected members with an overview of some key areas of work being undertaken at the moment. And I'll now hand you over to Joe to deliver the presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments at the end of the presentation, if that's okay with yourself, Convener.
That's perfect. I think that will work out perfectly. So our thematic presentation today is from the Fire and Rescue Service is about wildfires. I thought this would be an extremely interesting topic for most, whether it's California or our own Perthshire, or whether it's the north of Scotland's moors, wildfires, and having a really dry summer's been quite an effective thing. So it's good to hear what resources we are and where we can drag resources from to help support communities, and what, if it was happening in your area, is scary as hell, to be honest. So, Mr. Fitzpatrick, I'll leave it to you to present your presentation now. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Can I just first of all make sure that everybody can hear me in chambers and online?
In the chamber's fine. Yes is the answer
okay.
on that.
Perfect, perfect. So allow me to introduce myself. I'm Station Commander Joe Fitzpatrick. So I cover the Highland Perthshire on-call stations area, which covers from Glenshee out to Kinlochranach, with all stations in between. Blairgowrie, Aberfeldy, Pitlochry, Kirkmichael. So yeah, quite a large area, and an area within which one of the wildfire resources has now been located at Pitlochry. You should all be able to see the first screen, Housing and Social Wellbeing Committee SFRS Wildfire Strategy Update. Moving on to the next screen. So yeah, what is a wildfire? The definition of a wildfire, inevitably all wildfires start as what we would call, you know, a smaller vegetation fire that will grow into that. And it's at what stage we then define that as a wildfire, and which then kicks in that wider resilience partnership response to the incident, because it's escalating into significant environmental and community impacts as well. So yeah, what had traditionally been applied was basically if it was an area of 1,000 square metres, the flame length 1.5 metres, and if more than 4 pumping appliances had been allocated to the incident and resources committed for more than 6 hours. So, however, there are difficulties with that interpretation in terms of our engagement with partners. So we're currently in consultation with partners undergoing a review of exactly how we define what is a wildfire. At what stage does a small fire in the open become a wildfire? In the interim period, if we can move on to the next slide. In the interim period, we're applying basically the 1,000 square metres option at the moment. So, you know, what is a wildfire? Sorry, when do we get wildfires? I'm looking at my own screen here. Now, this can surprise a lot of people. I mean, traditionally, everybody thinks wildfires are going to be at the height of the summer. However, there's certain factors within which increase the risk, such as, you know, the level of vegetation, the humidity, and you would think intuitively that, you know, the middle of the summertime would be a time when wildfires will be at their most intense. That's not the case, because by the time the summer's here, there's a lot of green vegetation in it, and that's increasing the amount of moisture content at ground level. Fires start at ground level. If the moisture content at ground level is higher, then a fire is less likely to happen. Having said that, this year has been an exception. But in a normal year, we're really looking at a period from February to June as the peak period for wildfires to occur, with a peak in the April time. This year, things have moved on dramatically. 2024 was an extremely low year for wildfires, with the amount of precipitation we had, that's obviously that's a suppressing factor. This year, the big difference has been it's been dry. So we've had not only that peak from February to June, where we've had significant fires, but it's extended right up until just now. We've had wildfire danger assessments issued just very recently. So although what you're seeing there on the screen is the general picture, it's by no means it's by no means guaranteed that you will not get a large wildfire in August and September. So moving on to the next screen. So the impact of wildfires, there's obviously the socio-economic value through loss of damage in mature forests, damage to estate land, particularly those game estates where there's a heavy tourism input associated with that. Large wind farms closed down. They can't be operating when there's a fire going through and you can see in the picture there, the impact that that can have. There's an impact in terms of on-call SFRS resourcing. Predominantly, wildfires happen within areas where there's an emphasis on on-call response, so that places a heavy demand on our on-call personnel and resources. One of the key elements of any wildfire is the attendance of partners. Without partners, we're really not going to tackle a wildfire. It's heavily partnership intensive. So, for instance, at the Paul's Hill wildfire back in 22, we had the attendance of in excess of 15 estates with all their workers bringing Argo cats, fog lances, personnel. You know, so it was really heavily dependent on the partners attending to assist the service in implement the overall tactical plan to deal with that particular fire. So properties evacuated as well. There were 15 properties evacuated, not all at the one time. It was kind of like a rolling programme of evacuations while we reduced the risk associated with those properties, and also road closures. Roads closed for periods of days. You know, it's typically an extended period for dealing with a wildfire incident. It can be, you know, over a period of days, even up to a week. So the other one that really kicked off our concern, the other wildfire, apart from the Paul's Hill wildfire in 22, the next one was the Strathie wildfire. If you want to go on to the next slide, please. So that affected 80 square kilometres, which was one of the largest we'd had up until that date, up until this year, with the Dava conflagration of fires, which covered 100 square kilometres. So in terms of the environmental impact of the Strathie fire, 294 kilotons of CO2 contributing to carbon emissions. So, which obviously impacted the annual greenhouse emissions target for Scotland. That's just one incident, you know. So destruction of SSSI peatlands as well. Takes a lot of time for that to recover. Fire is a natural part of the cycle of regeneration of the countryside and peatlands and such like. But when it occurs on that kind of scale, it's having a significant impact, which can sometimes go beyond the ability of the wildlife habitat to recover in the normal timescale that it would otherwise do. So yeah, there's significant habitat and wildlife impact. Moving on to the next slide. So in response, the service has produced a wildfire strategy. Now, basically, in terms of the level of progression from that, the wildfire strategy is at the end of a line of policy and legislative provisions extending from the Scottish Government Fire and Rescue Plan 2022, seeking to hit some of the priorities on that, such as prevention and protection, response, modernisation, climate change in particular, and also partnership as 5 of the 7 key priorities under the Fire and Rescue Framework. That is translated into our strategic plans, and from the strategic plans we've now got the operational strategy for 2022 to 2032, and various work areas have come from that strategy, and the wildlife strategy is one of those work streams on that. So the strategy focuses on something I've already emphasised: partnership working, prevention, the SFRS response, which you'll be particularly interested in, I'll go into in more detail, as well as provision of information, like that's our media releases when it comes to a wildfire incident occurring, and also what our ambition is for the future as we develop the strategy going forward. So can we move on to the next slide? So the wildfire strategy, it's a tiered approach. So the tier 1 relates to all SFRS operational stations. All personnel are trained to at least tier 1 level in wildfire response. So that will typically be awareness, safety protocols, and being able to respond to a tactical plan which is put in place by the higher tier levels of command. So tier 2 stations, these there's 24 of these across the country, and they've received, and there's a list of them there. Ours within Perth and Connaught area, Alyth is a tier 2 station, so they've had a higher level of training applied to them. Tier 2 stations will have access to 4x4 support vans. There's 4 of these across Scotland, located at Dornoch, Afford, Oban and Galashiels are the areas for these 4 vans, and those vans are they provide the specialist equipment, which we're going to talk about, in order to enable those tier 2 stations to respond, and the personnel on those stations are all trained in the operation of that equipment. So for tier 3 stations, these are there's 10 across the country. Again, they're all detailed there, and Pitlochry is one of the tier 3 stations. So a tier 3 station is a station where the personnel are trained again to a higher level. They also, one of the key elements of the training that has now been introduced is what we call back burning or strategic burning, which is using fire to fight fire. That's a complete game changer, and obviously there's a need for a lot of training on that, a coordinated approach in order to ensure that that's carried out under the strictest controlled conditions in order to not cause a further problem. The equipment that's on these stations, there's a 4x4 Ranger with equipment on it, and there's also the ATV, which the all-terrain vehicle, which the crew are trained in the use of out in fairly difficult terrain. We'll look at that equipment next. So the final tier, tier 4, is the wildfire tactical advisors. So we have a cadre of tactical advisors who are trained to a high level in providing advice to the incident commander on tactical plan issues in relation to how best to deal with a particular wildfire. There are 4 command groups within the service for flexi duty officers. Each of the command groups has a wildfire tactical advisor on duty. So at any time within Scotland, we have 3 wildfire tactical advisors on duty, supported by, now as we're expanding the role, we're supported by secondary tactical advisors who aren't specifically the duty TACAD, but will be able to provide that kind of structured approach. So moving on to the next slide. So this is the tier 3 and tier 2 vehicles that I was mentioning. So you'll see the Ford Rangers there, they're equipped with a more limited level of equipment. There's the ATV itself is the main focus of the tier 3 stations. The Ranger does carry initial firefighting first attack equipment once if they are arriving quickly, but in terms of the wider equipment for tackling a wildfire, down in the right hand corner there is the tier 2 response support vans. So they have a lot more equipment in them. All the personnel are now trained up on all that equipment, and we're in the process of extending the number of personnel that are trained on the ATVs and also the deployment of the wildfire ranger support. Moving on to the next slide. So a huge aspect of our ability to tackle a wildfire successfully is partnership involvement, bringing in people from the local area. The fire service is heavily dependent on the assistance of the estate workers. A lot of these fires happen in estate areas, or indeed for a farmer if it's in a more arable part of the countryside. They will basically, so we have something called our community asset register, and people can volunteer to be part of that community asset register, and then the fire service is then able to call upon those specific items of equipment. You'll see one of the items of equipment that is on that, you'll see that flail cutter there at the top. That's a remote controlled vehicle. We can use that in order to cut what's called a control line, so that as the fire is basically, it's triangular fire, you know, if we can remove the fuel, then we can prevent the fire spreading. So we will use that remote vehicle in order to cut a control line. Now, there's only one in Scotland, so it's not always available and it's not always practical for it to get to where the wildfire is. It can do the initial high risk work to cut control line because it is remotely controlled. However, it doesn't cut down to mineral level. To stop a fire spreading, we need to get down to mineral level, which involves putting in personnel behind in order to grab that control line out and make it effective. Typically, your control line is going to be at some distance from the fire anyway, so the risk there, basically it's an indirect attack. So up in the top right corner there, we have a forced air unit, otherwise known as a leaf blower. Again, an absolute game changer, and our personnel, our strategy has now introduced these for personnel. That's an estate worker, they're deployed with their own leaf blower. Fire service now has these, and we can attack basically up to about a flame length of 500, half a metre to a metre with this, and it is basically blowing the fire back into the area. Again, it's tackling the triangular fire by preventing the fire spreading and radiating into the fuel which is in advance of the fire. Down at the bottom left corner picture there, that's a flail cutter, again with which has been deployed by a farmer. All the estates have this kind of equipment because it's in their interests to be able to deploy that equipment in order to safeguard their assets. Drones are an absolute game changer as well. If we can get sight on some of the fire, where it's progressing, that can help us in formulating our tactical plan, particularly in terms of a protocol we use called LACES, which is a safety protocol to ensure that all personnel on the fire ground are aware of safe areas, areas of escape, and we quite often can't get a big picture of a wildfire because of the sheer extent of it. It's not practical to go around the wildfire, so deployment of a drone is absolutely essential. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Helicopters. So the service doesn't have helicopters, which often surprises people, but it's just financially not practical. We will call in helicopters to particular incidents where it's merited, and there's a number of companies across Scotland. PDG are now in Inverness. There's Skyhook, Fife, but Skyhook are also over in Oban as well now. And these are the two companies that we will use quite a lot. We use them for water bombing, we use them for aerial surveillance. Typically, all the tactical advisors, the wildfire tactical advisors, are trained in being able to be a passenger safely within a helicopter. There's all sorts of protocols involved in how you approach a helicopter, how you're leaving a helicopter, how you communicate with the pilot. And again, they're used for transportation of equipment as well. We do not pay for a helicopter can cost between £2,000 and £5,000 an hour. So we do not, the service cannot resource that. It has to be the landowner responsible that pays for the helicopter, and if we cannot gain that approval from a landowner, it then becomes a fairly resource-intensive situation. Water bombing is by far the most effective means of direct attack on a fire. If we're not water bombing, we're usually looking at indirect tactics, which means more time, more personnel. Moving on to the next slide. So prevention, that's a heavy part of our strategy. If we can, that's Paul's Hill before fire and Paul's Hill during the fire. So it's a massive impact that a fire can have in the area. So if we can prevent it, that's obviously our first line of attack. Now within Perth and Kinross area, if you want to move on to the next slide, there's two particular focuses for prevention activity. Wildfires don't happen on their own. You can usually plot the source to some human ignition point. And so visitor management is a huge part of our prevention policy. And these are focused within particular risk areas. So we've got the Kinlochrannoch Visitor Management Group involved in Perth and Kinross Ranger Service, Forest and Land Scotland, the Lochrannoch Conservation Association, Police Scotland, and ourselves. So it's basically, they will go out and do regular patrols, particularly at peak times in the summer, and especially when a wildfire danger assessment has been released, which provides an indication of heightened risk of wildfires. That has been highly successful in terms of intervention and reducing the incidence of wildfires within the areas that these initiatives are deployed. So moving on to the next slide. So Clooney Lough Visitor Management. This is kind of led primarily by the Blair Gowrie crew. Needless to say, the Kinlochrannoch one was led by the Kinlochrannoch crew. So the Blair Gowrie crew, again at peak times, especially when there's wildfire danger assessment being released, we will go out and actively engage with members of the public who are camping within the Clooney Lough area. It's not exclusive to that area, but it is within that area that we will engage. And again, in partnership with the Ranger Service and Police Scotland as well. And that concludes the presentation. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Thank you very much for that. Our first question comes from Bailey Williamson.
Yes, thank you, Convener. My question is about the potential or possible impact that the introduction of a wildfire bylaw will have in Highland Perthshire. I think the bylaw was introduced on Friday, and do you foresee any impact that it may or may not have, Joe?
Yeah, well, these mechanisms are all intended to stop the incidence of wildfires. With the bylaw going in place, I mean, we hope to see some reduction in the incidence of wildfires. Not only wildfires, but smaller fires, which, you know, every wildfire starts off as a small fire. So if we can capture these smaller fires, which the bylaw is directed at, then we can intervene at an earlier time in fires. We can prevent the number of fires that we're having to intervene in, and also those ones that we are having to intervene in will have resources available to do so.
Thank you very much. As long as it's the same thing, it's not your second question.
No, it's just Joe. I'm just wondering if you anticipate there's going to be an effect in Highland Perthshire through displacement because of it. So people are more likely to have or can have wildfires in Highland Perthshire as opposed to the national park.
Yeah, well, there could very well be that, but these are tourists are going to these areas anyway, and they're not specifically going to light a fire. It's if they're going to this area, then they will be lighting fires anyway. You know, particularly barbecues and such like. That's often the source of ignition. Campfires as well. When these are happening, the people don't understand that fire doesn't just propagate up the way and out across the ground, it goes down the way. And with people with the best intention in extinguishing a campfire quite often find that they go away and the fire breaks out somewhere within the vicinity due to travelling underneath the ground. So that's an impact as well.
Thank you very much. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, my question, lots of thoughts. Clooney Loch within my council ward area, but it's more of a general question about this community asset register. I'm very much aware that the local businesses who are on the ground, such as you mentioned, estates and farmers, act very quickly. None of them want to see their environment destroyed. So how up to date is that? Because I do have a family member who has helped recently in a wildfire over a period of 2 days, and I'm not sure they're aware of that. And equally, do you connect through, say, with the NFU on that type of thing? Because it's really important that we've got quite a robust on-call system going there, particularly with some of these fire stations that are just volunteer-led, such as Crieff, Dunkeld, where these fires can still erupt.
Yeah, so the Community Asset Register is currently under review for the very reasons that you're mentioning there. It's how we promote it, how we gain people to be included on the Community Asset Register and encourage them to do so. But also, equally, there's a lot of, is when we take assets off there, which are no longer available. In a lot of cases, because the local crews are so engaged already with the farmers and the estates, the necessity for the Community Asset Register in terms of local response is reduced. Where the Community Asset Register comes in is where we can have, you know, assets such as that remote flail machine, which will be nowhere near the location of a fire in Perth and Ross area. Also, personnel with drones. That's where the Community Asset Register really comes into its own. The deployment of local resources from farmers and estate workers will happen irrespective of whether they're on the Community Asset Register or not. However, we are also in the process of preparing what are called fire response plans, wildfire response plans. This is something where we will look within the local area, within an area where there's either a high risk or a high, you know, incidence of wildfires occurring, and we'll pull together a plan which identifies the risk areas, the resources that can be brought to bear on that, as well as the communications with all the people that can be helped the service in tackling that. So it's not so much the Community Asset Register that will be effective in dealing with that. It is more the fire response plans, which, as I say, the service is actively now developing a strategy to produce plans for across Scotland. Clearly that's resource intensive, it's going to take some time, but we are working on those.
Convener, could I come back with just a quick follow-up?
Yes.
And would that include water availability? Because of course you're in these situations, you highlighted the helicopter water bombing, and again that recent example that I'm aware of, it was the water availability that was not at the fire, and therefore that then caused a delay in actioning.
Yeah, so we can respond to that. There are limitations with helicopters. Helicopters cannot lift from any water that is less than 2 meters deep. The Bambi buckets just don't work with that. Equally, they cannot fly over any power line infrastructure with the Bambi bucket, and they cannot fly over any roadway with the Bambi bucket. So that reduces the extent of the area which we can deploy a helicopter. That can be reflected in the wildfire response plan. We also have a high volume pump, which can be brought as a resource to a wildfire. Now that gives us an ability to bring fire to a position 3 kilometers distance. So we've got a fairly robust plan for getting water to the actual incident. We also have water bowsers, which we can deploy, and all these assets, all these resources would be recorded within any wildfire response plans, just so it's highlighted there for the attending crews that that's a resource that can be brought to bear. There's timescales involved with that. The deployment of the high volume pump takes a lot of time. And one of the big considerations for an incident commander is, will this incident be protracted enough to mean that the high volume pump will be an effective resource in dealing with it? Quite often, if water can be brought to the fire by, say, water bowsers, or by just use of the light portable pumps, then that's the kind of plan that we'll go for. So it's a kind of multi-layered strategy, that tactical, that an OIC will develop, and that's one of the main reasons why we have the wildfire tactical advisors in place, who can take a look at that bigger resource base and assess how best to tackle this fire, how best to bring things back to normality for the community as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Joe, for your presentation. Very interesting. My question really centres on prevention. We've seen the devastation these wildfires can cause. We've seen what happened in California, and just a small wind behind it, and the whole thing can get out of control. I think obviously not only is fighting the fire, but there's a huge risk to the firefighters involved. I think several lost their lives in California. So my thought is, given that we've got to change our climate, it's here. Should we be looking at perhaps introducing for landowners, whether public or private, to ask them to introduce fire breaks into their land as a form of protection, perhaps rather than prevention? I'm thinking perhaps along the lines of, we have a lot of ancient woodlands in Scotland, which we hear about a lot. A wildfire could just devastate that completely. Is it worth thinking about putting in fire breaks now, which would mean some loss of some trees, but they could be replanted to protect the bigger landfall? So I'm just wondering, is that something we should be considering, getting people to put fire breaks in now, in case of future wildfire that occurs? The difficulty, absolutely, but the difficulty occurs in predicting where that's going to be. It's the responsibility of the landowners who are seeking to protect their own economic assets, if it's just forestry, to consider that as part of their risk assessment for their asset that they've got there. Now, where we will assist is, we will add to that plan by producing a wildfire response plan for that particular asset if it's considered merited. Now, in terms of the protection of habitat, scarce habitat resources such as ancient native woodlands, again, that's something that Nature Scot will take a lead on, in terms of looking at that and assessing
what measures need to be put in place to protect a particular asset if it is considered to be of sufficient value, and they will be actively engaged with landowners in doing that. It's very much a partnership approach. One of the difficulties in putting in an advanced control line is it may become completely redundant if the wind's blowing in the wrong direction. So the response in putting in control lines is usually most appropriately left to the evolving of the tactical plan at a particular wildfire incident, because we can't guarantee that preemptive control lines will be effective.
Thank you very much. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Convener, and thanks for your presentation, Mr. Fitzpatrick. I had a very brief question about the last thing you covered, which was the heightened risk of wildfires. How do you measure that? Is that kind of qualitative assessment of you and your colleagues, or is there something more scientific in the way you allocate that? Thanks.
Yeah, so we will look at, when we're communicating what we call an informative message back to our control, we have a set structure of how we communicate a wildfire, and flame length and flame front length are two key aspects of that. And it is clearly that is going to vary over the flame front, just depending on what fuel has been hit and also what the weather conditions are like. The reason we're doing that is to assess the intensity of the fire. So it's low intensity, medium intensity, or high intensity, or extreme. That's the kind of categorization we're looking at. Anything above 1.5 metre flame length, that's going back in a message. Then the tactical advisor who may be listening remotely is then considering that we need to be looking at indirect tactics on that, because the risk of tackling a wildfire in close proximity to anything over 1.5 metres is too great for our personnel. So we're switching from direct attack to indirect attack. But it is a fairly subjective assessment and it can vary.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks for the presentation, Mr. Fitzpatrick. It was on the slide about the Strathy fire, where you said that that fire impacted our greenhouse gas emissions that year.
Yes.
Am I interpreting correctly from what you've said that wildfires are counted against any, I presume either Scottish Government or local authority greenhouse gas emissions for a year?
I don't have a definitive answer for that, but as I understand it, that assessment was carried out via our resilience partner agencies, SEPA in particular, who are monitoring greenhouse gas emissions. I can get more detail for you on that if you require, but at the moment I have limited information.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much, Convener, and thank you again, Mr. Fitzpatrick, for that thing there. Now, what I would like to ask, please, is that in my ward at the moment, because of budgetary constraints and biodiversity, our verge cutting has been restricted by quite some substantial amount. Now, what has happened is that up a very, very popular tourist route, the grass was allowed to grow to almost several feet high. When it was cut, it eventually turned into a real fire hazard. It was like dry hay, etc., all the way up. Now, anyone going along, any visitors in these areas, discarding a cigarette, for instance, was giving it fuel to start a fire. Are you included in any of this discussion about biodiversity, etc.? And there is a real problem that I've seen. Thank you.
As far as I'm aware, at the Wildfire Tactical Advisor level, we're not involved in that. However, if a particular risk exists and that is likely to be a source of ignition for a small fire then developing into a wildfire, that can be looked at as part of any wildfire response plan. But as far as I'm aware, no, there's no real assessment of biodiversity impacts.
Could I just come back on that? It's just that you can imagine where I am in the Armagh and Nairn ward. We are right into your countryside, which means that any small fire at the side of the road will rapidly gather speed up the side of the hills, etc. So I think it's very important that you're brought into this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's an interesting podcast around about May and June on Scotland Outdoors that talked about this, talked about the footprint and whether the longer growth of grass and trees made the ground cooler, made the ground more wet, therefore fires were less likely, or whether it provided fuel for a fire, as you've suggested. And I think the debate goes back and forward like a tennis match. So yeah, it's an interesting and I think a much more complicated matter than this committee. So Councillor McPherson.
Oh, thank you, Convener. I just wanted to ask Commander Fitzpatrick, you stated in your presentation that if it's required to use a helicopter, that can cost between £2,000 and £5,000 an hour, and that cost is paid for by the landowner. But I just wonder what happens in situations where there's a wildfire on publicly owned land or Forestry Commission land. Who actually pays for that? Thank you.
So Forest and Land Scotland, they will definitely approve the use of a helicopter and pay for it if the incident commander in liaison with the wildfire tactical advisor advises that as a recommendation. Clearly they've got massive assets there to protect. So yeah, Forest Land Scotland, big landowner, they will use helicopters and do quite frequently where they're available. That can often be a problem. Other landowners, they try to protect a resource, they'll definitely get a helicopter. And where we meet problems is where landowners are unwilling to meet the cost of a helicopter, which I kind of alluded to, then creates a different situation for us in terms of our tactical plan and resource intensity and the duration of the incident. So that's where the problems occur. There are situations where, in terms of cost-benefit analysis, a landowner who may stay remote from their particular asset is satisfied that their insurance will cover it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Mr. Fitzpatrick, for the presentation. My question's around the tactical advisors. I think you said there's about 3 or 4 across Scotland. Are there any based in Perth and Kinross or indeed in Tayside? And the second part of the question is, how do they engage locally to ensure that fire officers are kept as up to date as possible on tactical advice regarding fires, both for prevention and responding? Thank you.
Right, so the wildfire tactical advisor's main input is in response as opposed to prevention, although they can be brought in to if an individual station wishes a tactical advisor to attend. Our focus is on the tier 2 and tier 3 stations in terms of keeping them up to date with their training. Now, in terms of the first point you made about 3 or 4 tactical advisors across Scotland, the cadre is much larger than that. It's at any one time, there will be a minimum of 3, but potentially 6 on duty across Scotland, 1 within each of the strategic command areas, and usually a backup tactical advisor who isn't the designated duty tactical advisor at that time. So yeah, we do have significant coverage across all our duty groups. Our role as I myself am a tactical advisor, so yeah, you've got me in Perth and Kinross for my command duty group, but there are others within Perth and Kinross area as well. We can pull on the expertise of other tactical advisors in other areas should the need arise. A lot of the situation is where we monitor the fires remotely, and our tools for enable us to do that are becoming more and more effective. Recently introduced as the statutory satellite emergency mapping system, which SEPA leads on, which we can gain access to, and that will allow us real-time satellite observation of a wildfire to just assess its propagation over a period of time, work out which way it's going, work out what the resources at risk are. In terms of our response, a wildfire tactical advisor will be advised of a wildfire if it gets to what's called a level 1 delta, where that's 4 pumps committed. Where it becomes a level 2 incident, which is 6 pumps committed to it, the tactical advisor will then mobilise to that incident. And within the north area, that could be quite some distance, but the remote monitoring that's happened in advance of that actual mobilisation message then enables that tactical advisor to communicate directly with the incident commander on the scene, even though they might not actually be present at that time.
Thank you very much. Bailey Williamson for your second question.
Yeah, thank you. I think my question is more for officers than it is for Joe, but I understand that some of these wildfires can actually jump natural breaks by burning through plastic pipes that have been inserted into roads. And I'm just wondering if it's worth officers having a look or considering if it could be incorporated into our policies, like planning, for example. The use, or encourage people to use concrete pipes to try and mitigate against that potential spread of fires, particularly in high-risk areas.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's another issue on that is the cabling associated with wind farms. That's not very, very deep, and it can be a source of propagation for the fire, because clearly it's a weak point and there's a channel being dug. The wildfires tend to move fairly quickly across the ground. They burn the surface material rapidly. It then moves on and it becomes a black area. It's where you're into peatland, where the fire will then propagate down the way as well, that becomes a particular issue.
Thank you. And for our last question, Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. It sort of follows on from Councillor Frank Smith's question about vegetation, and it's a bit more general. There's a bit of a conversation within the landowning community that the change in the Muirburn licensing, less animals eating vegetation on higher up areas is contributing to the more rapid spread of wildfires. Do you have a comment to make on that, or an observation? Thank you.
It's too early to say. The change to Muirburn is very recent. It's not been fully implemented yet. The forthcoming season will answer these questions. The impact will be years down the line, though. So, yeah, it's too early to say, basically.
Thank you very much. And I think because it didn't appear in my chat, I wasn't aware that an officer wanted to reply to Mike as well. So thank you.
Apologies, I was just going to come in on the concrete pipes question. I think it's something that we could look at through guidance. I don't think it's something that we could request that landowners put in place necessarily, but certainly through guidance in the higher probability areas. And you would hope that landowners would want to do that. And that's certainly a point that Mr. Fitzpatrick has picked up on, is that the landowners and their level of responsibility. So yeah, we'll certainly take it away and have a look.
Thank you very much. That ends our question on this paper. So thank you, Mr. Commander Fitzpatrick, for your presentation. I always knew it was going to be an issue that everybody would be interested in. I've moved away from the pun that was involved in that.
Thank you for inviting me to present it.
No, you're welcome. So thank you. So in committee, we're going to take a 5-minute recess as a bit of a comfort break for people. We've been here 2 hours now, so that's pretty standard for us. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. We're now on to item 7 on our agenda, the Strategic Housing Investment Plan for 26-27 to 30-31. Can I Nicholas Zavorsky to Place Strategies Manager and Chief Planning Officer to introduce the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. The Strategic Housing Investment Plan, or SHIP for short, sets out the investment priorities for affordable housing over the next 5-year period and seeks to achieve outcomes set out within the local housing strategy. It is revised each year to consider the most up-to-date position and starts from 26-27, so not the current year, it's the 5 years moving on from that point. Approval is sought today to enable the SHIP to be submitted to the Scottish Government by their deadline of the 31st of October. To support the delivery of affordable housing, the Scottish Government provide a grant allocation which part funds the new supply of affordable homes. These allocations are known as Resource Planning Assumptions, RPAs. So the only RPA that we know is for 25-26, so the current year that we are in. So we don't know anything in terms of the SHIP period going forward from 26-27. It is hoped that following recent announcements that multi-year RPAs will be forthcoming, which will clearly help with certainty over that element of the SHIP in terms of the funding. Therefore, all we can do is use the SHIP as the current RPA figure. So that's what we've taken and taken that forward for that 5-year period. So it's continued through the lifetime of the SHIP. The SHIP is set out in Appendix 1. It's very detailed, sets out all the sites with known expectations, starts and completions, also the HMA that it falls within, the RSL that is involved, including PKC for many of the projects. The list isn't exhaustive in the sense that sites will come forward that we aren't currently aware of and others that may not come forward at all. It's always a changing position if you think about 5 years worth of housing developments and how that can change. For that very reason, the Scottish Government guidance states that you should over-programme by a minimum of 25% to allow for that slippage. The SHIP in front of you today is over-programmed by 39%, so clearly much greater than that 25%, but allows for that slippage that we know can come forward, and that's why it comes back every year. The SHIP has been developed through collaboration with the Scottish Government, RSLs, Housing, Planning and Health and Social Care Partnership, and a consultation session with the tenants groups. All of this consultation is essential to its success and ensuring that it is as up to date as possible. Alongside the main programme, we have sought to identify in the SHIP the rural community-led projects that have been supported by PKC to deliver affordable homes via the Rural and Islands Housing Fund. The goal of the SHIP is to demonstrate how the local housing strategy target of 210 new supply affordable homes per year will be delivered, with 10% of those being wheelchair or adaptable standard as part of that delivery. Thank you, Convener. I'm supported today with James Ross, who's in the chamber, and Campbell Hall, who is online as well.
Thank you very much. Also in the chamber today, we have 2 of our tenant tentatives. I have Ms Palmer and I have Mr Hammond Baker at the back of the chamber here. I've said to them already, I will take councillor questions on the paper. At the end of that, before I take councillor comments, I'll see whether Ms Palmer or Mr Hammond Baker wish to make any comments themselves regarding the paper as tenant representatives, and then we can move on to councillor comments thereafter. So, questions on this paper? Councillor McPherson.
Oh, thank you, Convener. I just wanted to ask the question on page 25, where it says the council has a new build programme target of 80 new build affordable homes per annum during the 5-year period of the SHIP. I just wondered, for my own curiosity, what the sort of mix of properties is. Is there a sort of a formula in terms of the type of property that's built in terms of bedroom size, a bedroom number, or is it specific to the identified needs of a particular locality? Thank you.
Thank you. It's the second part of that. It's the locality and what comes forward. So, and it's also dependent on the site and what the site can deliver. Obviously, if it's a more constrained site, chances are it might be smaller properties as opposed to family homes. But the intention is always that it's a complete mix, as you've rightly said, 1, 2, 3s and 4 bedrooms going forward, but also houses, flats and cottage flats and that consideration.
Thank you very much. Bailey Ahern.
Thank you very much. My question is a specific one regarding the Balhousie site. On page 26, it says there's a plan for 46, and on page 39, it ends up being 45. Was that based on the plans prior to the school burning down, or is that based on what's possibly coming up? Because it was agreed with residents there will be a completely blank page to start with, so there's we have no idea what it's going to look like or how many homes are going to go on there.
Yes, as you point out, there was unfortunately the fire in the building, which is obviously being demolished. Just 2 weeks ago, we ran a session with the residents of Balhousie, so the nearby residents. And we did have that blank piece of paper as you've described. Clearly, what we're trying to do is make most efficient use of that site going forward, and we're taking plans and we're going back out to the residents next week with a layout and those sort of numbers. So yes, those figures were based on what we had previously, what we thought could be delivered. It's important for the SHIP that we do have a number. So yes, I take the point that that's probably a slightly contradictory. We have a blank piece of paper in terms of that, but we know roughly what that site could achieve. But clearly, we've taken account of all the feedback that we've received, which is quite a lot, and we're taking that forward with that layout and that number. So yes, that's one of those things that can change is numbers on sites as well.
Thank you very much. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, convener. On page 31 of the SHIP paragraph 6.3, the first paragraph, it seems like there's a disproportionately small percentage of new builds being delivered in the areas of high deprivation. And the last paragraph on the same page, only 15% of new build homes are being built in the catchment areas of the topmost 5 deprived schools. And I just wondered, is this something that we should be concerned about? I'm not aware of having seen this sort of data presented in the SHIP before, or whether we have a policy of trying to target new build developments in areas of deprivation. So if we do have that policy, then what are we doing to address it, which may be linked to the statement in the report that there's no affordable housing targets for specific housing market areas. But if you'd ask the first point as to what weight we should be giving that part of the report.
Thank you. It's a very good question, and something that is probably not simple to answer in terms of one thing could be looking at the population, and as you say, there's expanded information in the SHIP. That was something that we wanted to try and bring forward, but if we were to put everything in, then the document sort of never ends really. But one of the considerations I think for that point is around the population of those areas that you're talking about. So proportionately, and I don't know the answer because I'd need to work out the stats, but proportionately I suspect we are seeing a relatively high number of affordable homes coming forward. Where it gets a bit more complex is also around lots of the sites that are in the SHIP are sites that have been allocated, or housing allocations through LDP 3. So that's a decision that is made around the spatial strategy and how we take that forward. So whether that's something we need to consider, not just the SHIP is just the vehicle for demonstrating where those sites are coming forward. Where we can make those changes is through LDP 3 coming up, or the local housing strategy. If that's something that we want to look at and prioritise, then we'd have to look at that, but clearly not deflecting away from other areas that need growth as well.
Just to Just to supplement what Nicola said there, I know that's focused on our new build, but to create a balance, because we are restricted with the land availability and site suitability, we also focus that through our new build, our buybacks programme as well, to enhance that target. So that's just purely focused on new builds. It doesn't include the number of buybacks that we've bought in those particular areas.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much, Convener. My concern is regarding a plan proposal for 89 houses at a unit called Captain's Glen at Bridgeverne. It's been brought to my attention by the Community Council, who are really concerned about this. Now, the area that they're talking about building these houses has already had lots of refusals because of flood issues, because of various other situations. Now, they're also concerned that the amount of houses going in there, they are a tremendous strain on their education at the moment. The school is almost capacity. The health situation is a problem. They really are worried about this proposal. So could you give me something I can go back and assure them in any way about this, please? Thank you.
I think the most important point, which doesn't just relate to that site, relates to all sites, that because it's in the SHIP doesn't mean that it gains planning permission. It has to go through that process. Everything that you've outlined will be considered alongside all the evidence that is needed of an ordinary planning application. The site in particular is an opportunity that has come about in an area where we know there's housing needs. So from a housing point of view, it's a good site to come forward. As we need to take account of it through the SHIP, but in terms of the planning application and any comments that people want to make, then clearly that process still exists.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bailey Williamson.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. I was just wondering if there's any evidence to back up that the community right to buy legislation is having an impact on land that's getting released for affordable housing in some localities.
Gosh, James is shaking his head at me as well. So that is a very good question. I think one that we need to take away and consider. There's nothing immediately that comes to mind in terms of the direct impact that I think you're talking about, but I think we'd have to go away and look at figures. But just to see whether Campbell Hall's got any comments on that, because I mean, it's rural areas, I guess, predominantly is what you're considering. So Campbell, I don't know if there's anything you would want to add.
Good afternoon. I don't have anything to add to that, Nicola. I have very limited knowledge of community right to buy legislation, particularly the recent developments, but it's certainly something that we could look into a little bit deeper, something we will look into a bit more detail.
Bailey Brock.
Thank you, Convener. I've actually got a couple of questions, but I'm quite happy to do them individually and later let others take. My first one is on page 23. I just want to be a bit more understanding item 3, when we've got development plan and purposes, the Perth and Cross housing market is divided into the 5 housing market areas. The 5 are listed, but underneath it says currently there are no specific housing supply targets for these HMAs. And given one of them, Strathern, I just wonder if you can give me a bit more information on that. If there's no specific housing supply target for that, what does that mean for the area?
It's a similar sort of answer to one that I gave before in terms of that HMA. So there isn't a specific target per HMA, and the reason for that is that it offers flexibility in terms of being able to bring sites forward, and equally that ability to prioritise. So should something come forward that we weren't expecting, then we wouldn't be tied to a target. But again, it's something that we can look at through the local housing strategy. So the SHIP itself wouldn't set that target, because it just simply brings forward the sites. But local housing strategy or LDP3, again, we could look to see. So LDP3 doesn't have specific targets. It has that overall target. We do have the data. So the housing needs and demands assessment. So it's currently a 2023 version that's been redone to support both local housing strategy and LDP3. So it's something that could be done, but it's just that risk of tying yourself to that target. So if something wasn't met, you'd be demonstrating that it wasn't coming forward. So happy to consider it further, but the view has always been we create that flexibility.
Councillor Braun.
Yeah, thanks, Karina. I'm looking at page 30, which is the 0.62 regarding gypsy travellers. Obviously, the work on double dykes is now well underway. But it comes to Bobbin Mill, we obviously there were various delays, and we say at the end that we're now looking to establish next steps. Now, I just wanted to have a timescale for that, because it seems to have been a problem that comes up in the annual assurance paper further on. Is Bobbin Mill now moving forward, or do we have some sort of level of time on this?
Thanks, Councillor Braun. Yeah, we we have started engagement with Bobbin Mill residents, the 5 residents that live in Bobbin Mill. We've undertaken a feasibility study. We've had one session with the residents to go through that feasibility studies, but there's been some delays with the residents regarding their decision on whether they want a replacement or a refurbishment. So work is ongoing, but it's a consultation process with the residents because it's their home at the end of the day. So assurances, we are working with the residents, and there is a meeting planned for this week, but I understand that might have to be rescheduled, but we are working closely with the residents.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mayor.
Thank you, convener. Nicola, I'd like to ask a question on page 49, Appendix 4, the private sector empty homes return. What I wonder is, how does the Perth and Kinross Empty Homes Service become involved in the identification of properties which are suitable to be brought back into use? Are members of the public able to flag up properties that they've seen but they don't know who the owners are? And when we have actually brought these properties back into use and the figures have been reported, etc., does PKC report this on our website or somewhere so that the public knows that we're actually involved in this really good work? Thank you.
Okay, just in terms of we probably need to split that question. The returns, it's I suppose slightly odd that it's in the SHIP anyway, because the SHIP is talking about kind of new supply in the mains, but it's something that is a request that goes in. So in terms of demonstrating or publicising, then it's here, but I think Elaine can come in and talk about whether it's on a website and certainly look at that. Yes, in terms of the Empty Homes Partnership, if somebody knows that a property is empty, and I think the difficulty is always whether it truly is empty or whether it's sat in probate or something like that, but clearly that could be flagged through to the partnership and they could go away and yes, have a look at that. But I suspect the chances are there's always something behind that, but clearly as a council we're doing lots of monitoring, so aware of that through council tax, etc. as well. So yes, that is a route that could be done. Elaine, do you want to?
So yes, we do, in terms of if you can report it if you see in empty homes. We do have quite a proactive empty homes team, so we do have a list and we do know which properties are lying empty, and there's a bit of reservation from some people that do have the empty homes because sometimes they're left as part of a death in the family and people just don't want to do anything with them. We have financial support that we could give as well, and we tie that in with us taking on that property for 5 years and allocating it. So that leads to my answer to your next question. We do put the information on our website, but it's just the numbers. We don't give addresses because these are now people's homes, so we don't disclose that under the Data Protection Act.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks. It's on section 4.4 of the SHIP, and it's about the balance of funds from the council tax empty and second homes fund for delivery of affordable housing. So over the last 10 years, we've spent on average about £1.2 million to assist a year to assist with the delivery of affordable homes. But we've actually got £4.8 million sitting in that fund. We know that there are areas of need for affordable housing. So I wonder whether that £4.8 million balance is actually working for us. You know, whether we couldn't just do something to immediately invest all of that money and alleviate an issue, and not be sitting with taxpayers' money in our bank account.
Thank you.
A bit sort of about clarity first. It's not taxpayers' money, it's tenants' money.
Well, it's come from taxpayers.
The officer's answer.
Yes, as you say, on average, it's about 1.2 million a year. In terms of spending it, I'm assuming if we turned up with a zero, then there'd also be a question about what happens if something comes forward as well. So it's probably that balance of having something available. But you're right, and you can see in the table in that section that you've highlighted the options that we've taken, and we're always looking for those going forward. And it's a mix of where funding comes from. So it depends. Obviously, there's the RPA, there's the rural funding as well, and there is key worker, albeit that's not a huge amount. So it depends on what can make up that balance as well. So is it the right place, the right location for that? So yeah, take your point. We need to monitor that. We need to make sure that we're spending it efficiently.
Thank you. I've got another question, but I suspect Councillor Duff might be about to ask it, so I'll hang on.
With trepidation in mind, Councillor Duff.
Follow that one. Yeah. My question is on section 6.6 of the report, which is in page 34 of the pack. And that's to do with rural and community-led housing. And I'm delighted to see that of the 10 community-led projects within that table, within that section, 9 of them relate to projects within my own ward, which is 73 of the 89, 73 of the 89 units that are listed there. But the paragraph above that talks about supporting the completion of 7 housing needs assessment in rural areas to allow these types of projects to kind of advance. And I just wondered where we are in terms of housing needs assessment. Is there a backlog? Is there outstanding housing needs assessments for other rural areas where community-led housing projects could be developed if these housing needs assessment were done? Thank you.
On this, because he predominantly works on those, but it's also just around the engagement with the development trusts as well. But I'll let Campbell come in and answer it, because he can answer it more fully than I can.
Yeah, Councillor, we did the initial housing needs assessments as far back as 2022, and the most recent one we did in Blairathal last year. The housing needs assessments are very much about the demand coming from the community. We don't go in and say, oh, you need a housing needs assessment in this area, but they have kind of developed over the years as a result of the communities speaking to each other. It's kind of a word of mouth thing, I guess. We don't have any plans in the pipeline to do any further at the minute. We had a couple of inquiries last year, one from the Community Council in Glen Lyon, who at the same time inquired about doing a local place plan, and the sensible advice there was, go forth and do your local place plan, because that's a lot of work to take on to do both at the same time. And I've no doubt that they'll come back in the next year or so to ask further about a housing needs assessment. But the housing needs assessments themselves are key in terms of the Rural and Islands Housing Fund, insofar as they provide the evidence for funding to come into the projects that we're developing.
Yeah, Councillor Duff, I met with Campbell and people from your ward and from Dunkeld during the summer, and they're an asset to your community. There's no wish to drive this forward, to have houses for local people, for local jobs, etc., etc. So they're an asset to your community, and obviously Councillor Williamson's community as well. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, and thank you, Nicola, for the report. I think I probably asked this last year as well, but when I look at Appendix 2, we have several headings: general needs, specialist supported wheelchair, in terms of category and criteria. But in Perth and Kinross in particular, we have an age demographic that's very much increasing towards the older age age range of our residents, and they have very particular housing needs that may not necessarily fall into wheelchair or specialist stroke supported. So I'm just wondering, at what point do we recognise that age demographic that we have here locally and consider how we reflect that in our housing plans? Thank you.
Thank you. It's probably something that needs to come through the local housing strategy, really, in terms of that priority that we want to give. And as you say, we're very aware of the ageing population within Perth and Kinross, and that requirement for 10% wheelchair and adaptable, but whether, yes, that should go further. I think that needs to be an objective that we consider through the strategy. And as you're aware, that is something that has to be in place. We're already starting those conversations about that review because it's a big document. It takes a lot of time. It has a huge amount of partners involved in it as well. So yeah, it's something we'll take note of and work that forward. But I guess just being mindful of more targets and the difficulty that can be to make sure that we hit all of those targets.
And just to follow up, I mean, it's not just about social housing, it's also about new housing developments, things like step-free access and various other things like that. So
thank you very much. You're going to come in later.
I was just going to add to that. We're actually just about to undertake a review of our older persons housing in conjunction with health and social care. So I think we need to look at it as a round, not just look at on our own housing, but as you said, in private, because we do have an ageing population as well, and we need to future-proof our homes and be ready instead of being much more proactive than reactive.
Thank you very much. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Convener. My question relates, it's from page 29 onwards, regarding empty homes. And the answer may well be in the report and I've missed it, but I just wondered, do we roughly know the total number of vacant properties and homes there are in the Perth and Kinross area at any one time? Obviously that will change over time, but do we have a rough idea? Thank you.
For clarity, is that our properties or private properties or both?
Well, it was specifically all properties. Obviously, hopefully, well, we're aware of what council properties. Yeah, but just in terms of like private properties, do we have an idea in totality and what the potential is there with vacant homes, empty homes? Thank you.
Yes, I mean, as you say, we're aware of council homes that are empty. It would be through council tax records, so I don't have the figure off the top of my head, but we can certainly find that figure. But that's how that would come about, and obviously the monitoring that Elaine has mentioned in terms of what the empty homes team are aware of. So we could pull those figures together.
Thank you very much. Councillor Barrett.
And thanks, Convener. My question was on empty homes as well, and it's good to see the improving performance in terms of the number of empty homes being brought back into use year on year. 93 last year. So although it's heading in the right direction, we're still very far short of the target of 135. And what are we doing to actually deliver on the target?
Good question, Councillor Barrett. And yeah, we've not met that target, and that's not from a want of trying. So we've put quite a lot of initiatives in place. Some of these are really complex, and some of them are funding issues as well. And taking projects to a particular area. It's also issues to do with issues with trades, getting the right trades in, which we're experiencing within the housing service. So although we've not met that target, there is an action plan in place to try and progress areas where we've had real challenges and blockages.
Bailey Brock for your second question.
Thank you, convener. I want to ask a question on page 27 at 4.7 Rural and Islands Housing Fund. Now, I don't know if it's a typo error or not, but just for clarity, and also the question I'm going to ask on this, it says that you're actively working with 6 community development trusts to support community-led affordable housing. There's actually 7 listed below. Can you maybe see if there's one of them being missed out, and if so, if it's Comrie, can I ask that some information on the Comrie one?
Yeah, I have to have a look at that, unless Campbell can come in and spot that that's a typo.
No, it's not a
it's
typo. We are actively working with 6 community development trusts. We did do housing needs assessment and an engagement with Comrie, with a housing action group in Comrie, who had a loose affiliation to the development trust there, but that's fallen away. The 6 that we're working with are mostly in Highland, with one in Strathardoll, and the reason for the 7th one is we're working with Blair Athol, a community council or a subgroup of the community council there. They are not a constituted development trust yet, but they are working towards that. These things take a wee bit of time to set up, so that explains the anomaly in the figure.
Thank you, convener. I want to come back in that one because on Comrie, just earlier on this year, they done a community action plan, and part of that was in it. So it would be good if communication can be made with Comrie Development Trust in conjunction with Comrie Community Council, because that is one of the things that they have in it is for housing. So it would be good if they could be taken into account on that, given the amount of work it was done on their action plan this year with the community.
Yep, we can do that.
Absolutely,
we can
yeah.
reach out to them again. Yeah.
That's it, me suggesting that. Councillor McCall for the second question.
Thank you. My second question is on buybacks. I noticed that the plan is for 40 per annum going forward, but I think we perform better than that. And so I'm wondering if we can get any more information on what our plan is to increase the number of buybacks.
Yes, as you very rightly point out, we certainly in the last 3 or 4 years have done very well with buybacks. The figure is 40 because that is what is set in the SHIP. But we already know for this year, whilst we've set 40, we're way above that at this point. So we're aware of that, and that's something we just need to look at for the next SHIP in terms of what do we put that figure up to in terms of being realistic with that as well. In terms of, going forward, then clearly that's something that we're looking at. Elaine is looking at that. We're taking more buybacks. We're having conversations with the Scottish Government around the funding for that as well. Obviously, that's part of the SHIP funding, part of the RPA funding is for buybacks. So it's about getting that balance as well between buybacks and the new affordable supply.
Sorry, I keep on coming in, apologies. But just to say our target was 40, but to date we've bought 97 back. And from discussions with the Scottish Government in terms of looking for more money and not relying on our sicking council tax monies, we'll be able to secure additional £1 million to support our buyback programme because it's progressing so well and it's seen as good practice throughout Scotland. So we're doing really, really well there. I appreciate the target is 40 and we need to look at that, but it has been a target 40 for some time.
Thank you. That's excellent news about the additional funding.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks. So the Councillor Duff asked an adjacent question to the one I was going to ask. So Councillor Duff was talking about the particular rural housing needs. I wanted to ask about the it's 4.8. It's the affordable rural homes for key workers. And there's reference in there to a survey being underway with the Health and Social Care Partnership to identify areas of key worker need within the care sector. And I just wondered when that survey would be complete and the results could then factor into an actual plan to deliver affordable homes, affordable rural homes for key workers. Because if we submit, if we're submitting this SHIP without that survey being complete and without a plan there, how do we then turn that into actual material on the ground action?
I'm afraid I don't know when the survey is closing, but I'll certainly find that out in terms of that data. In terms of taking the data forward, as you say, it wouldn't be taken account of in the SHIP because that's the sites that we've got, and that's what we need to submit for the 31st of October. But the SHIP comes back every year, it's updated. One of the recommendations is around sites being moved in and out, and that being agreed through the convener and through the Strategic Affordable Housing Board. Back to that point of things change. So if the data or a site came forward that, you know, particularly filled that, then that's something that we would look at. But I think the main part in terms of where that could really play out is through the housing needs and demands assessment and the data that comes through that. And that's something that we're looking at, again, to support local housing strategy, LDP 3, and taking that data forward. And if that crafts that need, again, back to local housing strategy, maybe there's objectives that need to slightly shift. There's already objectives in there, but whether certain figures can come out of that.
Just to give a bit of reassurance, we already have a key worker policy, and we also have that built into our allocation policy, but to date there's been no key workers identified by Health and Social Care, hence the reason that we've asked for the survey, because that seems to be an issue that they can't recruit in particular areas, but we've already got it in our policy. So again, we're doing a wee bit of more work. So your concern there that we might miss the boat, actually we've already got a policy and it's enshrined within our allocation already.
Thank you very much. That seems to be the end of councillors' questions. So I will ask Michelle to support Ms Palmer and the comments and things that she would like to make.
Oh, thank you for this opportunity. I've just got a list of points to make. So remodelling at 1 and 3. Okay. Remodelling at 1 and 3. What remodelling is being done at the current time? Okay. I haven't got page numbers on this paper. So now down the bottom of introduction, which is 1, the use of the word remodelling, and then it appears again over the page. 3, at 3, remodelling. What did he say? It's on. It is on.
Thank you. In terms of remodelling, then that would be, I mean, it depends on the site, but ordinarily it would be looking at either remodelling, increasing the number of units within a site, or it could mean just making it more accommodating for wheelchairs. So it's a variety and it depends on the site, but that's what that means. It's ensuring that it's more efficient going forward in terms of the use of that for more people as well.
Affordable to heat at 2, 5th bullet. How are you going to do this in stone buildings? So it's near the end of 2, number 2, strategic context. You've got affordable to heat. How are you going to make stone buildings affordable to heat?
Again, you need to switch your microphone off for us to reply.
I mean, again, that could link to your first question around remodelling. So that's work that can be done to ensure that it's more efficient. As you say, a stone building can only ever be so efficient, but it's about ensuring that we do what we can to make it more, insulated or whatever it might be, to make sure that residents aren't spending as much money on energy.
say that. That's good to hear you say that, because some time ago, a member of staff came and measured my flat, and I told him to measure the flats below because I had the high ceilings. I think his name was Martin Smith, and the idea would be that if we have false ceilings in the flats with high ceilings, put in a false ceiling and insulation, slide in the insulation. And so it's because people who are paying their bills are heating the flat above, because the heat rises and it's wafting through. So a lot of people sort of disappear during the worst times of the winter, and they're sofa surfing probably somewhere else because they're not prepared to pay the high bills, which they start to realise that their bills will be high because they've got high ceilings in their tenements, you see. So the top floor in my building is partly in the roof space. So I get everybody else's heat, and I've got good insulation. That was John Cruikshank did that for me some years ago. But the ones below me, they won't be able to pay their heating bills with the huge ceilings, high walls that we've got in the flats below. So I didn't hear from Martin Smith again, but last time I ever spoke to him, he did say that it was being looked at. But that's as much as I know, the false ceiling idea.
I don't know about the specific case on your specific building, but I can certainly pick that up with Martin. But as you say, that's one example of something that can be done and works that could be undertaken, is putting in a false ceiling. So yeah, I'll happily pick that up with Martin.
Speaker, I'll just carry on a bit longer. Is that all right, Councillor Pugh?
Yes.
I just want to say many good points. Buybacks, council surcharge on second homes, key worker, local lettings, initiatives, all good. That's at 4.8. Gypsy travellers sites, very good. And at 7 and 8, good mention of all groups, teams which make ship happen. Now, the last one I want to say is I exchanged emails with another person called Lynn. Her surname is Brown, Lynn Brown. She's doing tenant participation as well. And I decided to quote her, and she says, land overlaps with what we already do in tenant participation. To have involvement would give us more information and a fuller picture for our discussions. So what I would like to see happen is tenant participation. We start to include discussions about land, because in our meetings we only ever discuss flats and houses and EBIs. But if we could start to discuss land, and then we'd really need to have more contact with the LDP team, and land is not discussed. Nobody thinks to raise the land under the building they live in. So I'm saying that tenant participation should include that.
In terms of contact with the LDP team, then I can certainly arrange that, and we could arrange a session through the tenant panel and forum to have that discussion around LDP and what it does, the policies that it can do. So I'm absolutely happy to set that up, and hopefully that would help the understanding in terms of how housing allocations are made and the requirements for affordable housing, etc. So yeah, we can look to set that up.
Maybe then, if we could please have a tenant forum, because we haven't had one for a long time, and then maybe the LDP team could do a presentation at a tenant forum, which is usually bigger and in a different venue, so you have to pay for the venue. Because we used to have tenant forums at least once a year, every year, but they've stopped now.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll pick that up with Elaine and her team and make sure that the tenant forum is set up, but absolutely we can have that the development plans team turn up and give a presentation and allow time for discussion as well, I think, which is probably the important part of that.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
That's cool. Thank you very much, Ms. Palmer. I think your comments to this committee are always well received and well respected. Thank you very much. So I will now move the paper that is in front of us. This Strategic Housing Investment Plan, or SHIP, sets out the planned delivery of new supply affordable housing in Perth and Kinross for the next 5 years by both council and the housing partners. It seeks to deliver on the outcomes set out in the local housing strategy. During the first 3 years of the current local housing strategy, there have been 657 new affordable homes delivered in Perth and Kinross, which is an average of 290 new affordable homes per year. This has ensured that the local housing strategy target of delivering 210 new affordable homes each year has been achieved. Behind these figures, though, are real households in housing need, who now have access to warm, safe, affordable and energy efficient home that meets their needs in a community they want to be part of. The SHIP has been developed through engagement with tenants, the Scottish Government, relevant council services and the Health and Social Care Partnership, developers and the Housing Association partners. The SHIP, as proposed, will continue to deliver more than 210 new affordable homes per year for our communities to benefit from. It sets a framework for substantial investment in new affordable homes and contributes to our aim that everyone in Perth and Kinross has the right to the right home in the right place at the right cost. I'm happy to accept the recommendations and move this report for approval. Can I ask Councillor McCall to second the report, please?
Thank you, Convener. I'm very pleased to second this report and to accept the recommendations as set out. If I may, Convener, I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank both Nicholas Swarovski and Elaine Ritchie, and indeed all our officers who work across the service areas within this council, contributing collaboratively to the development of this strategic housing investment plan, but also crucially to its delivery. Thank you both.
Do I have any comments on the report? Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Convener, and I think I'd like to echo your appreciation and that of the Vice Convener to the officers and teams involved in the preparation and putting together of the SHIP. I think the SHIP gives us as elected members that the due and appropriate planning for the delivery of affordable housing in Perth and Kinross is being done competently, and that we can also take confidence in the redundancy built into or the extra capacity built into the programme to ensure that if projects slip, there are projects there to take their place, and we're not in danger of losing any of the really scarce resource planning assumption monies. I do think it's a very strange situation where there's such a big question mark over the finances for affordable housing when we have the new housing minister announcing £5 billion to tackle the housing emergency, and we still don't know how much of that we're going to get in Perth and Kinross and over what period of time. But maybe that will be addressed at some stage in the future. I think it would be really helpful if either members of this committee or the Affordable Housing Working Group could see detail of the Empty Property Action Plan and just have some consideration and input into that. As I said, we have a really strong record, an award-winning record through the Shelter Housing, Empty Housing initiative of the work that we've done with that. So I'm confident that we are trying to address every avenue, but it would be good to know if there's things that we could do more of, or that would require elected member support. I don't know whether Lynn was when she was talking in terms of the importance of land. We regularly hear that the biggest single constraint on the delivery of affordable housing is land supply, and I think if we're going to consider being more proactive in terms of the £4.8 million that's being added to at 1.2 million a year for affordable housing, there could be something that we can do in terms of site acquisition with that money, which would help deliver our affordable housing ambitions. So I think that's maybe something that we need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other comments in the chat. We'll be happy to move the paper. Thank you very much. For paper 8 and paper 9, I'm now going to hand the chair of the committee over to the Vice Convener, Sheila McCall. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. And we now move on to item 8 on the agenda, the Cultural Strategy for 2023 to 28 Midterm Review. And can I ask Kirsty Easton to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Convener, and good afternoon, councillors. Culture forms a key part of our local economy, and Perth and Kinross's cultural profile and reputation are growing. This has been, oh, sorry, I meant to have a presentation. So. Apologies. I just suddenly noticed on the screen. Just the first slide, please. Thank you. Sorry, I'll start again. So culture forms a key part of our local economy, and Perth and Kinross's cultural profile and reputation are growing. This has been supported by the Council's significant investment in cultural capital projects, including Perth Creative Exchange, Perth Museum, Perth Theatre, St Paul's Church and the City Centre Lighting Strategy. In 2021, our cultural positioning was further amplified when Perth was designated UK's first and only UNESCO City of Craft and Folk Art. This prestigious accolade presented a unique and valuable opportunity to further enhance our reputation as a cultural destination and a hub for makers, creatives and visitors. Next slide, please. The cultural strategy was approved by full council in May in 2023, and it aligns with our corporate plan vision for a Perth and Kinross where everyone can live life well, free from poverty and inequality. Its development was led by Culture and Community Services, having been informed by the findings of the Cultural Task Force, which was a partnership convened by Council in late 2020 and early 21 in response to the COVID pandemic. A number of consultations informed the content of the strategy, including stakeholder engagement and public consultations, elected member consultation through leaders' discussions, and engagement with Creative Scotland and Museum Galleries Scotland. Additionally, the Culture Forum, which was formed in 2022, which played and continues to play a key role in shaping delivering this strategy. The Forum brings together our cultural and heritage organisations and is chaired by the Chief Executive of Culture Perth and Kinross, with the support and participation of PKC officers. The Forum members are pivotal in the development of the 56 actions, which sits under the strategy's 9 pledges. Some of the actions are being delivered collaboratively by partners, others are assigned to specific organisations to progress. Next slide, please. Since the strategy's approval in 2023, good progress has been made despite the significant capacity required for the delivery of Perth Museum and the need to accommodate some structural changes. To give you a few examples of the recent achievements, Perthshire Box Office is a region-wide initiative that offers a centralised online, telephone and in-person ticketing service for the cultural, heritage, leisure and tourism sectors in Perth and Kinross. The collaboration of multiple partners across Perth and Kinross has received significant investment from PKC over the last 2 years. The delivery of 3 new community assets, a glass kiln, a ceramics kiln and a photography darkroom, which are all available for use at WASP Perth Creative Exchange on a pay-as-you-use basis. These facilities are available for members of our community to use and are after completing the necessary inductions provided by the project-funded technical advisors. These assets have been delivered in partnership with WASPs and through accessing UK Share Prosperity funding. And of course, we cannot forget the opening of Perth Museum in March 2024. Culture is now positioned within economy development and planning, providing a strong platform for the cultural workstream and enhancing our opportunities to connect cultural initiatives with their economic potential. It is our intention to redesign the format and layout of the cultural strategy to match others which sit under the economy service, forming a cohesive suite of economic strategies. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, there are 9 pledges included in the strategy, each with their own set of actions, with 56 in total. It is important to consider ways in which we can continually improve and to ensure we're meeting targets which link with our corporate plan. With this in mind, we are proposing 3 new actions which link with the City Centre Development and Design Framework, our climate goals, our tourism strategy and action plan, and further cultural business development. These new actions will be delivered as part of the UNESCO City of Craft and Folk Art programme of activities. Before I speak about these new actions, I'd like to provide a little bit of background on Perth UNESCO City of Craft and Folk Art designation. Next slide, please. The UNESCO Creative Cities Network is a group of 350 cities who have agreed to use culture and creativity as a driver for sustainable development. Perth is currently one of 66 cities of craft. Our UNESCO work is designed and delivered by our UNESCO Programme Officer, who has developed a programme of activity which will deliver impactful and meaningful projects and initiatives. Our designation connects us for a wealth of knowledge, gives us a specialist platform for promotion, and is a seal of approval for local makers and businesses to use. Our priorities are to develop partnerships within the UNESCO Creative Cities Network, to highlight and create opportunities for local makers in Perth and Kinross, and to strengthen networks and connections between creative communities in our area. Next slide, please. Some of our key achievements to date include the delivery of the 3 new community assets, which I mentioned earlier, so the glass kiln, ceramic kiln and photography darkroom, which are already being used by our communities in WASP Perth Creative Exchange. A rebrand of Perth City of Craft and Folk Art. We worked closely with UHI Perth, and their 3rd year visual communication and design students were given the UNESCO City of Craft rebrand as a class brief. A number of students worked collaboratively on the project and presented their designs and ideas at the end of term. Selected students were offered a design prize, an internship to roll out the new branding across the designation platforms, and the opportunity to meet members of our local cultural community. The Perth print process. Perth was invited to take part in the Valandi Heritage Festival as part of the Tartu's European Capital of Culture programme in October 2024. A small exhibition celebrating print was commissioned and taken to the event as our first UNESCO City of Craft international opportunity. This exhibition has now been developed and is on display at Perth Museum. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, in recognising the significant value of our UNESCO designation, we are seeking approval today to add 3 new actions to the strategy, which will be delivered under the City of Craft programme. Under Pledge 2, we propose to utilise our UNESCO City of Craft and Folk Art designation as a driver to share culture and celebrate creativity within our public realm and underutilised spaces, including vacant shop units and city centre signage. Next slide, please. Under Pledge 6, we propose to be actively engaged in UNESCO's Mondicult activity, share data, cultural policy and climate change mitigation within our cultural sector. Next slide, please. Under Pledge 9, we propose to focus the programming of the UNESCO City of Craft and Folk Art designation on raising the profile, creating opportunities and building relationships with local creative and craft businesses. We believe that the addition of these new actions will deliver meaningful and impactful results which will strengthen the outcomes of the strategy. Next slide, please. We are also recommending the approval from committee today our approach to the continued progression of the delivery of the strategy. We're proposing that officers work with the various partners on each of the actions to identify where actions have been fully met and are complete. We are also proposing to explore which actions can be developed further, and are seeking to approve the amended reporting structure of this strategy, where we'll bring back an annual report to this committee and also provide an update through the Council's annual performance report. Next slide, please. To summarise, with strong progress made in the first 2 years of this strategy, the proposed addition of 3 new actions, along with the continued engagement and monitoring of the 56 current actions, the opportunity to attract investment and to grow Perth and Kinross's reputation as a place for culture and heritage is significant. The cultural strategy is making a real impact in realising our cultural ambitions and continuing delivery of our corporate priorities. Thank you, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kirsty. We'll invite questions now, and we have with us today, we have Steve MacDonald, Economic Development Manager, and Poppy Jarrett, UNESCO Project Coordinator, to assist in answering any questions. And can I call first of all, please, on Bailey Mike Williamson?
Yes, thank you very much, Vice Convener. My question is about grassroots organisations and the volunteers which are playing a key role in supporting our culture and heritage, with many of them facing multiple pressures and appear to have very isolated voices across Perth and Kinross. I was just wondering if that was something that could be addressed through the forum.
Thank you. Yes, certainly. I mean, the forum was established and set up in 2022 to lead the development of the pledges and also to give a voice to cultural and heritage organisations. And I appreciate, obviously, grassroots organisations and our volunteers are key to supporting these organisations. So I think through the forum and through this review, we could certainly make sure that they're represented and more supported and have a voice on the forum if they're not already.
Thank you. And Councillor Rona Brock, please.
Thank you. I want to ask a question on your culture strategy document 2023 to 28, and it's actually, I just wondered how often it gets updated and new information put into it.
Thank you. So we just inherited this early this year. So as part of the review and bringing this paper, this is something that we're going to be working on. It's reviewing the strategy and lining it with the rest of our economic suite of documents. But we'll also, given the fact that the deadline is 2028, start to look to review the strategy in the coming months.
Yeah, just because I don't want to bring attention to the one on the Strathern and Strathallan part on page 69, because it's actually the radio station, it's 2 years out of date. So it's things like that. And also if we can include organisations that have been council funded in the past year or two, because they're not mentioned in this document at all. And I think it would be relevant to going forward, especially in the culture part of it.
So thank you. It's a very valid point and we'll take those points on. We are aware that the document is out of date and needing updated. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce Barrett, please.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I just wanted to ask, with regard to the Cultural Pledges and Actions item 1.3 and the launch of the Invest in Culture and Sport programme, the progress update, as I said, says that the actions to be reviewed. I just wonder if you could tell us what's the reason for that, and what is the position with how successful that funding drive has been.
No, thank you for the question. As I mentioned, we have inherited this cultural strategy and we have been reviewing all the actions that sit in that. And as part of that, there is a few that we realised haven't got an update. So as part of this review process that we're currently undertaking, we'll look to see if these actions, particularly maybe this one that you've mentioned, is still achievable, whether it still aligns to our resources and wider priorities. So for some of these actions, we will need to obviously review and see if they need reshaped or maybe an alternative approach to how we deliver to get better outcomes. So this is one of the actions that we will be reviewing in the coming months.
Councillor Ken Harvey, please.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Thanks for your report. I'm just a little biased because I'm a member of Perth Festival of the Arts Committee, but I'm just wondering why there's been no mention of Perth Festival of the Arts in the strategy. Have you approached them and they haven't replied, or have they not been part of this type of thing? Thanks.
Thank you. Others may want to come in on this one, but I'm not sure why they've not been featured in the strategy. That's something that we can look at when we're reviewing this to include them going forward. I'm aware, and I think they are part of the cultural forum, or they certainly have been attending the cultural forum. So it's maybe just a case of when we're doing a review of the strategy, we will include them going forward.
I don't see any other questions from anyone, so I will now move the report. This report highlights the progress made to date on the delivery of the cultural strategy and seeks approval for the progression of the actions for the strategy's remaining 3 years. The report also seeks approval for a revised reporting structure and for an annual progress report to be brought before this committee. Perth and Kinross's cultural profile and reputation are growing. This has been supported by the Council's significant investment in cultural capital projects, including Perth Creative Exchange, Perth Museum, Perth Theatre, St Paul's Church and the City Centre Lighting Strategy. In 2021, Perth and Kinross's cultural profile was further amplified through Perth's designation as the UK's first and only UNESCO City of Craft and Folk Art. This prestigious recognition presents a unique opportunity to further enhance the area's reputation as a cultural destination and a hub for makers, creatives and visitors. The culture strategy was developed in collaboration with multiple partners and contains 9 pledges with a combined total of 56 actions. Much progress has been made on these actions and next steps will be considered by the lead partners for each of these actions. Additionally, the introduction of 3 new actions to be delivered through the UNESCO City of Craft programme of activities increases the impact and reach of the strategy, further positioning culture as a key economic driver in Perth and Kinross. I am happy to accept the recommendations and move the report for approval. And can I ask Councillor McEwen to second the report?
I'm happy to second the report.
Thank you, Convener. Are there any comments on the report? I don't see any comments in the report and I don't see any amendments. So can we agree the recommendations as set out in the report? Thank you. And we now move on to item 9, which is the annual assurance statement for 2024-25 for the Scottish Housing Regulator. And can I ask Elaine Ritchie, Strategic Lead for Housing and Communities, to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Vice Convener. As some members are aware, in order to comply with the Scottish Housing Regulator framework, the Council must approve and submit an annual assurance statement giving assurance that it's meeting its legislative regulatory standards for social housing in Scotland. This is the 6th year that landlords have been required to publish an annual assurance statement. The service has a range of self-assessment and quality assurance, scrutiny and monitoring arrangements in place to ensure the continued delivery of high-quality services. We also have well-established mechanisms in place to seek feedback from tenants through complaints, tenant satisfaction arrangements, but also through our scrutiny work. Appendix 1 to the report provides an awareness of some of the information that supports this statement. Committee will note we did not meet all our legal obligations around the management of our Gypsy Traveller sites, which transferred to the HRA in 2022. To provide assurance and demonstrate progress, the Council is required to submit quarterly updates to the SHR under an agreed engagement plan. To date, 2 quarterly updates have been submitted and we've received positive feedback from the SHR on the progress made. However, I'm confident we've achieved all the standards and outcomes of the Scottish Social Housing Charter for tenants, people who are homeless, and for others who use our service within our legal obligations relating to health and safety, housing, homelessness, equalities and human rights, and tenant and resident safety. Finally, throughout the year, this committee has received several key reports providing assurance that we are delivering and in some cases exceeding the standards required by the SHR as outlined in Appendix 1, and that Housing Service continues to deliver high levels of services with strong performance across all areas and ongoing high levels of tenant satisfaction despite the ongoing challenges faced. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. And we have a couple of questions ahead of us. Councillor Ian McPherson, please.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question relates to page 138, 4.8, with regards to the Gypsy Traveller site and the engagement plan. I just wondered, does the Council have a time frame of when the issues identified in the engagement plan will be fully complied with? Thank you.
Council doesn't set the time frame, it's the regulator that sets the time frame, and we're hoping to get it concluded by the end of the year, but that'll be dependent on the progress we'll make at Bobbin Mill.
Thank you. And Councillor Bob Ron.
Councillor McPherson beat me to the questions.
Sorry, I just got that at the last minute. Just in terms of the supporting documentation that we're submitting to the housing regulator, and it may seem a bit like bells and braces, but I wondered, given their questionability to address things in a joined up manner, whether we actually needed to resubmit the quarterly update information just to demonstrate that we have been implementing actions to address their concerns, as well as information or actions from any other Gypsy Traveller engagement or action plans, just to evidence the fact that those concerns are being addressed. It's really just, are we spelling out the steps that we're taking sufficiently clearly for the housing regulator? Thank you.
As I noted in my introduction, we've submitted 2 updates to the point that the emails didn't get sent through because I sent too much information to them. So to give you reassurance, it's significantly comprehensive information that we're sending, but things take time in terms of we've not completed, they will not renege until the Double Dykes is finished, and that's a phase programme. We're on phase 3, working really well. Comparing ourselves to other local authorities, it's quite challenging, and we're working with the residents at Bobbin Mill, but again, we're working with them on their pace. All the other things that were picked up were dealt with immediately, so it's not huge issues that we're constantly communicating with the regulator. They're waiting to be complete at Double Dykes and also the outcome of Bobbin Mill.
Thank you. Second attempt. I see no more questions in the chat box, so I will now move the report. This report notes the requirement of the Council to submit and approve an annual assurance statement which provides assurance that the housing service is meeting legislative and regulatory standards for social housing in Scotland. This report provides a brief overview of the framework and appends the 2024-25 annual assurance statement. During 2024-25, Perth and Kinross Housing Service complied with all but one of the regulatory requirements as set out in Chapter 3 of the Scottish Housing Regulators Framework regarding the management of our Gypsy Traveller sites. However, I'm pleased to hear of the significant progress made by the service to achieving compliance with meeting this requirement and the positive feedback received to date from the Scottish Housing Regulator on the updates provided through the engagement plan. Appendix 1 of the report details an overview of information that supports the annual assurance statement and the evidence required by the Scottish Housing Regulator, which is supported by the well-established mechanisms in place to seek feedback from tenants through complaints, tenant satisfaction arrangements, but also through the scrutiny work carried out by tenants. As noted, the Council's housing service continues to deliver strong performance across all areas within the service. This performance, along with high levels of tenant satisfaction, provides the assurance that the service is delivering good outcomes and services for their tenants and people that use the service, and in line with guidance within the Scottish Housing Regulators published regulatory framework. I am happy to accept the recommendations and move the report for approval. Can I ask Councillor McEwen to second the report, please?
I'm happy to second the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before we move forward to comments from councillors, can I ask Ms Palmer or Mr Hammond-Baker if they wish to comment on this report?
No, I don't think I need to comment. It was good to see that the tenants at the Gypsy Traveller sites, they found that they wanted to write to the regulator without realising they were already getting what they were going to get. But it shows that they're prepared to use law, and it's important that tenants doing tenant participation move on a stage in their efforts to use law. So in other words, making a complaint is okay. It's perfectly okay to make a complaint.
You're quite right, and that's why the complaint system is there. So thank you for that. I don't see any request to comment from anyone else in the room, so I shall hand the chair back now to the convener. Thank you. I forgot to say, since there are no amendments, can we agree the recommendations as set out in the report? I will now hand back to the convener.
I thought I was going to have to move it there as well. There you go. That's the end of our business today. Thank you, everybody. Sorry for the slightly delayed event, but I think the first 2 thematic presentations were very good. Thank you all for your attention.